Chapter 735. Looks like you're the one who took the scarlet fire fruit. After glancing at his companion's injuries, Louis Bing looked at Gray with a scrutinizing gaze. Although his companion was much weaker than him, he was still one of the 5 strongest people among the younger generation of the Sacred Weapon tribe. His strength was enough to dominate the younger generation of the Divine Weapon territory. However, he had been defeated by the other party, and in a crushing manner. From the time he heard the battle to the time he rushed over, it had only taken him a few seconds. To be able to defeat his companion in such a short time, he must have the strength to crush his companion. It's useless to say anything now. If that's what you want to think, then think so, Gray said non-committally. Whether it was the person just now or the leader of the younger generation of the Sacred Weapon tribe, they were all certain that the scarlet fire fruit had fallen into his hands. It was useless to deny it. If you defeat me, the Sacred Weapon tribe will not pursue the matter of the scarlet fire fruit. If you're defeated by me, then hand over the scarlet fire fruit. Louis Bing looked at Gray and said word by word. The sharp aura on his body became even more terrifying. It was as if a peerless weapon had been unsheathed, completely revealing its sharpness. All right, since the other party had already said so, Gray did not argue anymore. If he could not defeat the other party, it was useless to argue. The other party only needed to defeat him and search him. However, the other party's promise moved him. As long as he defeated the other party, the Sacred Weapon tribe would not pursue the matter. Although this was a display of extreme confidence in his strength, it gave him a chance. If possible, he was not willing to become enemies with a saint-level force. It would be best if he could keep the scarlet fire fruit and not become enemies with a saint-level force. As for the other party going back on his word after being defeated, although he did not feel that the other party was that kind of person, he did not mind killing him and teleporting away from the Divine Weapon territory. Although the Sacred Weapon tribe was powerful and had a law-level expert overseeing it, it was impossible for them to track him if he teleported away. However, from now on, he would probably be targeted by another saint-level force. Kaka. Louis Bing did not say anything else. His left and right arms transformed into huge sharp blades. Sharp golden light wrapped around them, and then they slashed down at Gray. Whoosh, whoosh. The 2 golden lights were like 2 peerless blades, piercing through the clouds in the sky and slashing towards Gray. Before they even got close, they already gave Gray a feeling of being stabbed by knives. This attack was almost the same as the one from the Sacred Weapon tribe, but it was clearly stronger. Gray did not dare to be careless. Whoosh! The dark green fog was like a rolling dark cloud in the sky, covering the sky and completely blocking the sunlight. It crashed toward the 2 golden rays of light with an overwhelming force. Chi-chi! The 2 golden rays of light were like 2 sharp blades that cut into the sea of dark green fog. Although they were greatly hindered, they still quickly cut through the dark green fog and slashed towards Gray behind the dark green fog. With Gray's Annihilation class power and the dark green mist, the corrosive power had reached a scary level. Even the body of an Annihilation class elite was instantly turned into acid. Under such a strong corrosive power, the 2 golden rays of light quickly shrank after falling into the sea of dark green fog. After the 2 streaks of golden light sliced through the sea of dark green mist, the 2 streaks of golden light flickered before completely collapsing. They were evenly matched. The power of their attacks was on the same level. So, regardless of whether it was Gray or Louis Bing, they were not surprised by this situation. The moment they attacked, the 2 of them had already judged the result from the power. The instant the dark green fog and the 2 golden blades dissipated, the 2 of them attacked once again. Louis Bing's body quickly flashed and appeared behind Gray. 2 more golden blades slashed toward Gray from behind. It was like Gray had eyes on his back. The dark green fog wrapped around his sword. It became a very exaggerated dark green greatsword. It swept back and blocked the 2 golden blades. Boom, boom, boom. In just a few seconds, Louis Bing and Gray had already exchanged a dozen blows. Louis Bing quickly appeared in front of and behind Gray. He attacked Gray from every angle, but he was blocked by Gray's dark green misty greatsword. The two of them were fighting very quickly. Even ordinary demon light warriors could not see what was going on. It was extremely dangerous. Every time they clashed, it contained a scary power that could make an ordinary annihilation class die without leaving a corpse behind. Although they were fighting in the air, the shockwaves could not help but affect the ground. With the two of them as the center, everything within a 10-mile radius was affected by the shockwaves. The dense forest was wiped away. The deep canyons were filled up. The steep peaks were cut off. The 10-mile radius had a fundamental change. Boom! After another collision, the two of them retreated and put some distance between them. Can we end the test now? Looking at Louis Bing, Gray coldly asked. He did not think the strongest elite of the Holy Soldier race's young generation, someone whose status was like that of a holy palace's holy son, would only have this much power. Good. You have what it takes to make me fight with my full power. Louis Bing's eyes were filled with a sharp light. He looked at Gray with excitement. As the strongest of the Holy Soldier race's young generation, he was not just the Holy Soldier race. He was also the strongest of the young generation in the entire Holy Soldier territory. Among the young generation, there was no one who could make him fight with his full power. Now he had met someone who could make him fight with his full power. He could not help but be excited. Finally, there was someone of the same generation who could make him fight with his full power. Ka-ka! With a crisp sound, a bone layer suddenly grew out of his left and right hands, which had already turned into huge, sharp blades, and quickly wrapped the two sharp blades. Suddenly, the two blades released in even scarier presence. It was enough to make an Annihilation class elite lose all will to fight back. So, Louis Bing's two white bone blades had a golden light around them. His entire body was like a golden light rushing toward Gray. The air was torn apart, and the wind was like a hurricane. Shio! Getting close to Gray, the two white bone blades had a golden light around them. They slashed toward Gray. The space above the two bone blades rippled. The air was torn apart, creating a vacuum behind them. Just the wind alone was enough to break a few mountains on the ground. With such a scary power, the two bone blades attacked Gray. Such power! Being locked down by the two bone blades' scary power, Gray's face looked serious. He felt a strong sense of danger. Such power was definitely beyond the Annihilation class. If he was hit, even if he used his alloy power, he might not be able to block it without being hurt. Shwa! The dark green mist around the sword suddenly turned into a purple light. Under the hazy purple light, the raging air suddenly became quiet. Any raging air that got close to Gray suddenly lost its power and became calm. Where Gray was, it was like a pool of stagnant water. There was no wind or wave. It was a very normal scene, but under the fierce fight and the strong wind everywhere, it was very abnormal. With a stifling silence that made one's hair stand on end, Gray's sword met the two bone blades that were coming at him. Boom! There was a scary explosion. The sword with a purple light around it and the two bone blades with a golden light around them collided. A scary shockwave spread out from where the two collided. The shockwave swept through everything within a dozen miles. The earth and rocks were crushed. Smoke and dust filled the sky. It covered the sky and the sun. Everything was covered. He forced Louis to use all of his power. The young man who had been injured by Gray earlier had already retreated more than 20 li away. He looked at the area covered in dust and shock. Among the younger generation, he was the first one to be able to force Louis Bing to use his full strength. If Louis is using all of his power, this person is going to lose. Beside him, there were three other people who had heard the commotion. One of them had a cold smile. As a member of the Holy Soldier race, he knew how strong Louis Bing was when he used all of his power. There had been a fourth-tier Annihilation class elder who had been defeated by him. The young man who was fighting Louis Bing was very strong. He was even stronger than the four of them. There was no way he could beat Louis Bing when he used all of his power. Yes, this person is going to lose. The other two young men nodded with certainty. They had absolute confidence in Louis Bing's power. They did not think this person could block Louis Bing when he used all of his power. At this time, the smoke and dust dispersed. The situation in the sky, far away, appeared in front of them. What? He blocked it? The four of them were shocked. In the sky, there were two shadows. One of them was Louis Bing, and the other was his opponent. His opponent was not defeated by Louis Bing as they had expected. Instead, he blocked Louis Bing's all-out attack. How was that possible? How can he block Louis's all-out attack? A young man could not help but rub his eyes. When he opened his eyes, he saw the same scene. There were still two people in the sky. Inherited weapon. The weapon in his hand must be an inherited weapon. He must have used an inherited weapon to block Louis's attack. The other young man looked very certain. He did not think there was anyone in the young generation who could block Louis Bing without using an external force. If he had blocked it, then he must have used an inherited weapon as an external force. Yes, the weapon in his hand must be an inherited weapon. The eyes of the other young men lit up. They suddenly felt that this was the most correct explanation. They did not think anyone could block Louis Bing's all-out attack with their own power. At least, no one in the God Weapon territory could do it. Chapter 736. Very strong power. I am afraid even a 4th-tier Annihilation class would not be able to block it. No wonder he is a son of Saint. Both of Gray's hands were slightly numb. He had been knocked back a few hundred feet by the powerful impact. The magic power weapon in his hand was a heritage weapon, but he did not activate the amplification effect of the heritage weapon. Encountering a son of Saint-level opponent, he could not help but be excited. He would not use the heritage weapon's power to fight. You are not from the God Weapon territory. Louis Bing's face was solemn. Even though he had used all his strength, he was still unable to gain the upper hand. This was something that had never happened before. It was impossible for there to be no news of such a disciple in the divine weapon domain. The only explanation was that he was not from the divine weapon domain. Indeed, I am not. I just happened to pass by. Gray nodded and admitted it. There was no need to hide it, so he admitted it openly. I have never met someone as strong as you among my generation. Let's use the Scarlet Fire Fruit as a bet. Let's see who is stronger. Louis Bing looked at Gray with excitement. This was an opponent who was close to his age. He wanted an opponent like this. Only an opponent like this could arouse his desire to fight. So, the air was torn apart. Louis Bing crossed a few hundred feet in an instant. His right hand, which had become a sharp blade, had a golden light around it. It was like a lightsaber slicing toward Gray's waist. Pung! The sword had a purple light around it. Gray blocked with his sword. He blocked the strike of the golden blade. At this time, another golden blade sliced toward him. Poof! The clouds in the sky were split in half by the sharp golden blade. The sharp blade spread all the way forward. It spread for more than 10 miles before it disappeared. One could imagine the power of this slash. However, Gray, who should have been slashed by the golden blade, had already disappeared before the golden blade slashed down. The golden blade was unable to cut him. Shwa! Behind Louis Bing, a sword with a purple light slashed toward his back. When the second golden blade slashed down, Gray's body was shrouded in purple light. Relying on the time acceleration derived from the law of time, he instantly dodged and appeared behind Louis Bing. Sensing the attack coming from behind, Louis Soldier's hair stood on end. He felt a sense of danger behind him. He turned around, and the sharp blades formed by his left and right hands crossed in front of him like a shield. Boom! The violent explosion was so loud that it could be heard even from tens of miles away. The long sword wrapped in purple light clashed with the two golden blades. Louis Bing's figure was forced to retreat. However, he managed to block Gray's attack from behind with the help of the two golden blades, so he wasn't injured. Whoosh! However, Gray naturally wouldn't let his opponent go so easily. With the acceleration of the time rule ability, he once again closed in on his opponent and slashed down with his sword. Boom! Hastily making a move, Louis barely managed to block the sword, but he could not help but be forced back again. A towering mountain peak that pierced through the clouds was knocked down by him as he retreated, and almost half of it was broken. Whoosh! Rushing out of the collapsed rocks in a slightly sorry state, Louis Bing's expression became more solemn. He was actually at a disadvantage when fighting with the younger generation. This had never happened before. However, his eyes were filled with excitement. An opponent that could bring him such great pressure was the opponent he wanted. Compared to this opponent, his previous opponents couldn't even be considered an opponent. Whoosh! Gray appeared behind Louis Bing, and the sword with terrifying power slashed at Louis Bing's waist. Louis Bing felt a fatal danger, but this time, Louis Bing didn't turn around to block with the sharp blades formed by his hands. It was as if he had given up on defense. However, he obviously couldn't give up on defense. The next moment, there was a sudden change. Pu. From his body, there were suddenly more than 10 bone chains formed by white bones. Each of them became 100 meters long, and their surface was wrapped in golden light. The tips were sharp, and like snakes, they attacked Gray from all directions. Whoosh, whoosh. The sudden change caught Gray unprepared. He quickly gave up on attacking and dodged the attacks from all directions. Relying on the acceleration of the law of time, he quickly dodged. However, the attacks were too sudden, and there were more than 10 bone chains. Even with the acceleration of the law of time, he couldn't dodge all of them in time. Clang, clang, clang. The sword in his hand slashed out continuously, allowing him to block the impact of the bone chains and retreat. A son of Saint is indeed not simple. Looking at Louis, who had more than a dozen bone chains growing out of his body, Gray's expression was grave. The opponent was indeed a son of Saint. His strength was so strong that even he couldn't easily suppress him. Originally, relying on the power of the law of time and acceleration, he had already suppressed the opponent to a disadvantage. However, he didn't expect the opponent to quickly display a powerful move and reverse the situation. Whoosh! This time, it was Louis Bing who pounced at Gray. More than 10 bone chains slithered around him like snakes, looking for an opportunity to attack. Once Gray entered his attack range, he would definitely be attacked by these bone chains. Whoosh! Not daring to get close to the opponent, relying on the acceleration of the law of time to maintain a distance from the opponent, Gray slashed out with his sword from a distance. The purple light quickly attacked Louis Bing. There was no tearing of the air. Instead, wherever the purple light passed, the air that had been affected by the aftershocks immediately quietened down. Pung, pung, pung. One bone chain after another collided with the purple light. Every time it collided, the golden light on the surface of the bone chain would dissipate, and the bone chain would be shaken off. However, under the continuous collisions of more than 10 bone chains, the purple light became dimmer and dimmer, and finally dissipated. Pung, pung, pung. Louis Bing once again pounced at Gray, while Gray maintained his distance, using one purple light after another to attack his opponent from afar. In a short period of time, the two sides had exchanged over a dozen blows. It's about time. Louis Bing, who was covered in bone chains, was like a hedgehog covered in spikes. Gray had no place to attack and had to retreat continuously, as if he was completely suppressed. However, it was reasonable to say that Gray, who should have been suppressed below, could not help but reveal a trace of a smile at the corner of his mouth. This method of growing bony chains all over his body was indeed extremely powerful, but to say that it had suppressed him was definitely a misjudgment. Gotcha! Another purple light attacked Louis Bing. The bone chains on Louis Bing's body blocked the purple light. They should have been defeated by the bone chains like before, but something strange happened. Countless cracks suddenly appeared on the surface of the bone chains that collided with the purple light, and then they turned into countless bone fragments and dissipated. Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha! Bone chains shattered one after another, blocking the purple light. Louis Bing, who was supposed to be covered in bone chains and looked like a hedgehog, had all of his bone chains shattered. The bone chains that grew out of Louis Bing's body were extremely sturdy, but the law of time's characteristic was the corrosive nature of time. This was a characteristic that could ignore defense. Whoosh! Without the obstruction of the bone chains, Gray instantly closed in on Louis. His sword, which was entwined with purple light, pierced downwards. Louis Bing's expression changed, and he quickly retreated, but it was too late. Pooh! The long sword stabbed into Louis Bing's abdomen, and a deep wound appeared on Louis Bing's abdomen. He flew backward and crashed into several mountains before stopping. He did not use the law of time to reduce his opponent's lifespan. Now, Gray's control of the law of time had reached an extremely high level. He did not let the law of time spread throughout his opponent's body to reduce his lifespan. Instead, he let the law of time affect a very small part of his body. His opponent was the most outstanding disciple of the sacred weapon race's younger generation. If he reduced his opponent's lifespan, he would definitely become enemies with the sacred weapon race. He did not want to do that unless it was necessary, so he controlled the spread of his power. Lewis, how could this be? The other 4 young people of the sacred weapon race could not help but exclaim. Their eyes were filled with shock. Although they felt that the young man who fought with Bing Lewis was extremely strong, they never thought that Bing Lewis would lose. But now, Bing Lewis was the first to be injured. Although they knew that this kind of injury was not enough to make Bing Lewis lose his ability to fight, they couldn't help but think about a question. Would Bing Lewis lose? If this were before, they would not have thought about such a ridiculous question. Among their peers, how could Lewis Bing lose? Now, they had to think about it. Among my peers, you are the first one who can hurt me. In the collapsed mountain, Lewis Bing rushed out. There was a deep wound on his abdomen, but it was visible to the naked eye that the wound was shrinking and stopping bleeding. This was the characteristic of the body's self-healing ability. Among the many abilities that his opponent had, he should have the self-healing ability. That is an honor. Although he had hurt his opponent, Gray did not look mocking. His opponent was not weak. He had reached the 2nd level of the Annihilation class. Unfortunately, his opponent had encountered Han's son, who had the time rule power. His power was restrained. The bone chain, which had a very strong defense and relied on by the time rule power, finally collapsed under the time rule power. How is it? Do you want to continue? You're very strong. You are so strong that you scare me, but I have not lost yet. With an extremely solemn expression, Lewis Bing said in a serious tone. His hands returned to their normal appearance. Then, he took out a sword from his spatial item. It was a sword with blood-red patterns on its surface. Weapon fusion. He let out a low roar, and then a strange scene appeared. The sword in his hand actually melted, turning into liquid and quickly fusing into his body, finally disappearing outside. On the surface of his body, there were changes. Streaks of blood-red lines appeared on his body. These blood-red lines were the same as the lines on the sword just now. Chapter 737. This is the law ability I have mastered, the derivative ability of the law of arms, weapon fusion. If you can defeat me, this battle will be considered your win. Lewis Bing said with a serious expression, being forced to use his last resort, and he might not even win. This was something he had never encountered before, but this was the opponent he wanted. Law of arms, weapon fusion. Looking at Lewis Bing, who had strange blood patterns on his body and an obvious surge in his aura, Gray's expression became even more serious. Before this, he had never heard of or read about the law of arms in books, so he naturally had no understanding of the weapon fusion derived from the law of arms. Swish! To be safe, he had to make the first move. With a slash of his sword, a huge purple light with a strange power that silenced the surroundings, like a huge purple blade, attacked Lewis Bing. Boom! Blood-red flames condensed on Lewis Bing's fist, and he punched out. Immediately, a pillar of blood-red flames as thick as a mountain flew towards the purple light and collided with it. Kacha! With a crisp sound, the purple light was unable to withstand the pressure and exploded under the power of the blood-red pillar of flame. The blood-red pillar of flame carried a terrifying force and crashed towards Gray. The terrifying power, even after shattering the purple light, still had terrifying power. Ripples appeared in the space, like a piece of cloth violently shaking. In Gray's eyes, it was as if a blood sun was crashing towards him. Before he even got close, he could feel the terrifying heat. Even with his fire ability and strong resistance to heat, he could not help sweating all over. But the moment the sweat appeared, it was evaporated by the scorching heat. His body was scalded red, and he was like a cooked prawn. Danger, extreme danger. Whoosh! The feeling of danger made Gray's hair stand on end. The acceleration of the law of time was pushed to the maximum, and Gray, who was covered in purple light, quickly dodged to the side. Puff! A huge hole appeared in the clouds as the blood-red pillar of flame spread forward. It was unknown how many miles it had spread before it finally dissipated and disappeared. Relying on the law of time's extreme acceleration, Gray barely dodged the blood flame pillar. This power? Gray's face looked extremely serious. Although the power of that blood-red fire pillar was not as strong as a 6th-tier annihilation class, it was definitely at the 5th-tier annihilation class. If he was hit, even with his alloy power, he would be severely injured. He might even die on the spot. This kind of power shocked him. In terms of the strongest combat power, he had already lost. Even the strongest ability he could use now, the power of the rules of time, was a whole level lower in power. If he wanted to be comparable, he would have to be able to unearth an offensive ability derived from spatial ability or an offensive ability derived from space-time ability. Fortunately, a battle was not only about destructive power, but also about defense, speed, and many other aspects. Boom! Another blood-red pillar of flame shot towards Gray. The acceleration of the time law ability was pushed to the limit, and Gray dodged again. Louis Bing's fists punched out continuously, and blood-red pillars of flame as thick as mountains attacked Gray. Gray was in danger time and time again, and then he used the time rule ability to accelerate and dodge in a sorry state. Now is the time. Once again, he dodged the blood-colored flame pillar. Gray's eyes suddenly shot out a sharp light. His figure shrouded in purple light shot towards Louis Bing. Facing the blood flame pillar after blood flame pillar, Gray seemed to only have the power to protect himself. He did not have the power to fight back, but in reality, he had been looking for a chance to fight back. As he dodged again and again, the distance between him and Louis was getting closer. The distance just now was the distance he was confident he could close in on Louis before Louis attacked again. Whoosh! As expected, before Louis could react, he had already closed in on Louis. The sword with purple light around it slashed toward the wound on Louis's abdomen that had not yet healed. Pang! As expected, Gray's sword slashed into Louis's abdomen. Under Gray's sword, Louis's body flew backward like a cannonball. He crashed through a dozen mountains before finally stopping. Although his destructive power was not as good as Louis's, he had a speed that Louis could not compare to. With his speed, he managed to injure Louis again. Boom! Dirt and rocks flew everywhere. Some of the rocks that buried Louis weighed hundreds and thousands of tons, but they were still sent flying by Louis's punch. Louis's body was revealed. The combat armor made from the leather of the Annihilation-class Blood Beast was broken. On his abdomen, a wound was clearly visible. Surprisingly, the wound was not bleeding. Not only that, but the wound was not too deep. There were no signs of another injury. It was not that the healing power was too strong. It had stopped the bleeding and healed the wound in an instant. It was just that Gray's sword had not been able to add any more wounds to Louis's body. Not injured, Gray was stunned. His most powerful attack couldn't even injure Louis Bing. This was a shocking result. It was a result that made him a little confused. He had always relied on his powerful defense to make his opponents suffer. Now, he was the one suffering because of his opponent's powerful defense. Louis won. One of the 4 disciples of the Sacred Weapon Clan said excitedly. Of course, ever since Louis used weapon fusion to refine his body, he had no chance of winning. Another disciple of the Sacred Weapon Clan said matter-of-factly, "That's true." The other 2 disciples of the Sacred Weapon Clan nodded. Clearly, they agreed with this disciple of the Sacred Weapon Clan. As disciples of the Sacred Weapon Clan, they naturally understood what kind of ability weapon fusion was. It was an ability derived from the weapon rules to integrate powerful weapons into one's body and obtain powerful combat power. Those who used this ability would have extremely powerful combat strength. The higher the level of the magic power weapon, the stronger the combat strength. In theory, if they fused with a rule-level magic power weapon, they could even unleash rule-level combat strength. Louis Bing, who had fused with a powerful inherited level magic weapon, could unleash a destructive power that could be imagined. And this was not the most powerful part of this ability. The most powerful part of this ability was that the person who used weapon fusion would have a powerful defense that was comparable to a magic power weapon. Lewis had integrated an inherited level magic power weapon. Naturally, he would have the defense of an inherited level magic power weapon. The defense of an inheritor-class demon weapon was something even a 6th-tier Annihilation-class elite would find difficult to break. That was especially true for Lewis Bing's opponent. It was safe to say that after Lewis Bing used his weapon meld ability, he was invincible. So, although shocked, Gray did not let go of the opportunity to attack. He instantly appeared beside Lewis, who had just rushed out. Purple light wrapped around his sword. He slashed at the wound on Lewis's abdomen. Lewis was smashed into the ground, leaving a huge hole in the ground. He had not stopped there. With the acceleration of the time rule ability, he quickly appeared beside Lewis, who was in the hole. He slashed again and again at the wound on Lewis's abdomen. Boom, boom, boom. Dirt and rocks flew everywhere. The furthest they flew was more than 10 miles away. With Lewis Bing as the center, a huge crater that extended for several miles appeared around him. The tattered clothes on Lewis's upper body were completely blown away. There was no blood coming out of his abdomen, and there were no new wounds. The original wounds had even shrunk. With his self-healing ability, the wounds on his body were quickly recovering. Facing Gray's continuous attacks, Lewis did not have any new wounds. It's useless. After weapon fusion, my defense is now comparable to an inherited level weapon. If you don't have a stronger attack, you will lose. Lewis Bing shook his head and said. There was no mockery on his face. To be able to force him to use weapon fusion, his opponent's strength had already been recognized by him. Naturally, he would not mock him. After weapon fusion, your defense is comparable to an inherited level weapon. No wonder it's a rule ability. None of them are simple. After stopping his attacks, Gray let out a long sigh. Rule abilities were above normal abilities and mixed abilities. Every one of them could be said to be heaven-defying. Time rule ability was like that. Space rule ability was like that. Soldier's rule ability was also like that. This is troublesome. Looks like I have to use space rule ability. Gray acknowledged that the power of the rules of war was very heaven-defying. However, the power of the rules of time was also very heaven-defying. Gray had even thought of how to use the power of the rules of time to break his opponent's weapon fusion, but he could not do so. Time rule ability had the characteristic of ignoring defense. Any creature or object that came into contact with it, no matter how strong their defense was, would decay under the stacking of time rule and eventually die. If he used this method, it would be unavoidable to deprive the opponent of their lifespan and let them die from exhaustion. This was bound to make an enemy of a Saint-class force. It had to be avoided as much as possible. Moreover, the opponent did not want to kill him, so he could not kill him. Whether he was a good person or pedantic, this was a matter of principle for Gray. If he could not kill the opponent and still wanted to win, then he could only use space rule ability. Originally, he wanted to see if he could defeat the opponent with time rule ability alone. He wanted to see if time rule ability could contend against other rule abilities. Now it seemed impossible. He could only use space rule ability. Chapter 738. I didn't want to use this trick, but I have to. Be careful. Looking at Lewis Bing, Gray said seriously. Lewis Bing acknowledged Gray's power, and so did Gray. Lewis Bing's power was definitely the strongest among the younger generation. Even against the Chaos Holy Sun from the Chaos Holy Palace, he might not lose. Schwa. The space barrier was activated. Invisible barriers appeared around Lewis Bing one after another. They quickly blocked every direction around Lewis Bing. What is going on? The space barrier was visible but invisible. Logically, it should not have been discovered, but the stronger a person was, the sharper their intuition was. A strong sense of danger reminded Lewis Bing, reminding him to respond immediately. Boom! He immediately threw a punch at Gray. The blood-red flame column carried a terrifying power. It caused the space to ripple as it went toward Gray. This time, Gray did not dodge. Instead, A pair of greenish-black wings appeared on his back. He quietly floated in the air. Boom! The blood-red flame column did not extend far before it hit the invisible space barrier. It was in a stalemate for a moment before it completely collapsed. The space barrier was not unbreakable. Last time, the rule-level void beast tentacle had broken the space barrier. However, that was rule level. Back then, Gray's level was only at the 3rd level of magic light. Now that his level was at the 1st level of annihilation class, the strength of the space barrier had greatly increased. It was uncertain if a rule-level attack could break it. However, below the rule level, even if it was a 6th level annihilation class attack, Gray was confident that he could block it. Although the red flame column was powerful, it was still a bit away from the 6th level of annihilation class. It was impossible to break it. What is blocking it? Louis Bing's confident attack was blocked. His expression changed. The sense of danger grew even stronger. He quickly retreated. Pung! However, after only retreating a few dozen feet, he felt that he had hit an invisible barrier. He could not retreat. Pung! The sense of crisis in his heart grew even stronger. He suddenly stepped into the void, and his figure quickly rose up. However, he only rose a few dozen meters before he collided with an invisible barrier again. From Gray's perspective, he could see that Louis Bing was surrounded by a spatial barrier. Louis Bing was trapped in a cage formed by the spatial barrier. It's trapped by something. Although Louis Bing had not tried in all directions, he had already guessed that his surroundings were blocked by this invisible barrier. He made a prompt decision and punched out with both fists. The blood-red flame pillars shot in one direction, trying to break it. Boom, boom, boom. The blood-colored flame pillars continuously hit an invisible spatial barrier, and blood-colored sparks blossomed one after another on the invisible spatial barrier, bringing about violent booms one after another. A terrifying aura filled the air, but Louis Bing's face grew darker and darker, because his attacks had no effect at all. It is useless. Even if your battle power is at the 6th level of annihilation class, you will not be able to break it. Gray shook his head and said, without understanding the characteristics of the spatial barrier, Louis Bing was unable to make the most correct response and missed the best opportunity to escape. Furthermore, even if he made the most correct response, he might not be able to escape the spatial cage. The space-time ability that was derived from the combination of the time rules and space rules. Gray had only developed the space-time backtracking ability, which was the ability to go back to the past. This ability had a great impact. If he was not careful, it could cause a huge change to the original space-time. He had sealed it and was not going to use it easily. However, he'd figure out many ways to use the time rules and space rules together. One of them was the construction of the spatial cage. When he was under the acceleration of the time rules, the speed of the construction of the spatial barrier would increase by several times. The original shortcoming of not being able to construct 6 spatial barriers at once was not completely solved, but it was made up for. With this construction speed, even if Louis Bing could make the most correct response, he might not be able to escape the spatial cage. I admit defeat. What ability is this? After stopping his attack, Louis Bing sighed and looked at Gray with a bitter smile. He knew he had lost. He had lost from the moment he was trapped. He had not suffered any substantial damage and had a trump card that was comparable to an inherited weapon's defense. However, when trapped, there were too many ways to kill someone. He could think of a few of them himself. If the cage was filled with water and drowned, although he was powerful, he would not be able to stop breathing. If he was trapped in the water for a few hours, he would also drown. Or if the cage was filled with poisonous gas, the toxicity of the gas would slowly kill him. There were many ways, so from the moment he was trapped, he had already lost. He did not think that his opponent's cage had no means of attack. The spatial barrier ability extended by the space rules. After removing the spatial cage, Gray answered. He did not hide it. There was no need to hide it. Although his opponent had not seen through it, he would definitely find out when he returned to the Sacred Soldier race. Therefore, there was no need to hide it. Space rules? It's not an injustice to lose. Hearing that it was a space rules ability, Louis Bing felt better. Although he had suffered the first defeat in his life and did not feel good, The person who had defeated him was someone who had the same rules ability as him. He defeated Louis Bing? The sounds of the intense battle could be heard even from tens or even hundreds of miles away. Hearing the commotion, the people who were searching in the nearby area could not help but rush over to check the situation. One of the teams was the 7 people from a younger generation of the Sebel clan that Gray had encountered before. Hearing that Louis Bing had taken the initiative to admit defeat, the 7 of them opened their mouths so wide that they could swallow a goose egg. Their hearts were filled with fear and joy. Who was Louis Bing? He was the strongest person in the younger generation of the Sacred Soldier race, a Saint-class force. He was also the strongest person in the younger generation of the Divine Weapon territory. His status was equivalent to the Saint of a Saint-class force. He had never been defeated since he started cultivating. However, such a person had taken the initiative to admit defeat. How unbelievable was this? What frightened them was that the person who had defeated Louis Bing had actually clashed with them before. They had actually clashed with such a terrifying person. Thinking of this made them feel a chill down their spines. Fortunately, although they had paid a heavy price, the matter had been resolved. They had not tried to persuade their elders to attack the other party. Otherwise, with the combat power that the other party had displayed, the Sebel clan might have been wiped out. Louis was actually defeated. The 4 young people from the Sacred Soldier race were shocked and in disbelief. Louis Bing, who was almost invincible in their hearts, had been defeated. They did not want to believe such an outcome. Space rule ability. He actually has space rule ability. Is he a saint of a holy temple? The young man from the Sacred Soldier race who had been injured by Gray said seriously, "It cannot be wrong. He must be a saint of a holy temple." Another young man from the Sacred Soldier race nodded seriously. Outside of the Saint-class forces, even the strongest families with a 6th-tier Annihilation class would find it difficult to master rule ability before reaching the 6th tier of Annihilation class. The other party must have come from a Saint-class faction like the Sacred Soldier race. He must have been a saint of that faction. We have to inform the family as soon as possible. We have to prevent them from clashing with this person. The people who had seen the battle between Gray and Louis Bing were not just the 7 children of the Sebel clan and the 4 young men from the Sacred Soldier race. There were also many people from other families and factions. Staring at Gray in the air, they all looked serious. The faction behind Gray aside, Gray alone was enough to pose a threat to their families and factions. They all secretly decided that they had to inform the rest of their families to avoid clashing with this person. Only a few people from the strongest families with 6th-tier Annihilation class elites were calm. They also made up their minds to avoid clashing with the other party. No matter if it was the other party's potential or the faction behind him, it was too big. Clashing with such a person would only do them harm. So, nodding at Louis Bing, Gray used teleport and disappeared. Although he felt that the other party would not go back on his word and would not ask the elites of his family to ask him for the Scarlet Fire fruit, it was better to use teleport to make sure that the other party could not find him. When he reappeared, he was already thousands of miles away. He went in a different direction and continued his search. 2 days later, Gray appeared in another dense forest. It was no wonder that no one had visited this plain for tens of thousands of years. There were many precious magic herbs. In 2 days, he had obtained many precious herbs. Although their value could not be compared to the Scarlet Fire fruit, which could be used to make a 6th-tier magic potion, there were still a few that could be used as the main ingredient to make a 5th-tier magic potion. What made him even happier was that he had collected the most precious magic potions to make the Gold Pattern Potion and the Thunder Pattern Potion. That meant that if he could find a suitable person who could make a 5th-tier magic potion, he would be able to make these 2 kinds of 5th-tier magic potions. Of course, it was not easy to find someone who could make a 5th-tier magic potion. If it was a 5th-tier potion master, he would have to prepare 2 or 3 portions to guarantee success. However, he quickly thought of a solution. I seem to have fallen into the wrong line of thinking. It is indeed awkward for me to go and ask for the potion, but if it is a family that does not seem to have anything to do with me, this awkwardness can be avoided. Since it was awkward for him to go and ask for the potion, he would let other factions come and ask for the potion. He now had many factions that did not seem to have anything to do with him. Quick, let's go. That palace must have been the residence of a rural-class elite. Standing on top of a tree, Gray was thinking about where to go next. Suddenly, a dozen people flew past in the sky. They were excited as they flew. Chapter 739. It was a towering mountain, but it had been cut into two halves, leaving behind a flat section. On the flat surface, there were many palaces. They were bigger than the West Hope Kingdom's palace that Gray had visited before. Only the Chaos Holy Palace's palace was bigger. The giant stone pillar was so big that it would take a dozen people to wrap their arms around it. The giant stone door was 300 feet tall. The surface of the door was very detailed. Even if one looked at it up close, they would still think it was very beautiful. The style of the building was very bold, but it was also very delicate. It had a bold side and a delicate side. The two styles were very different, but they were perfectly combined. It was like the work of a god. A few days after the plane was opened, shadows appeared. Among the four of them, there was an old man, a middle-aged woman, and two middle-aged men. The four of them did not have any presence. They were like ordinary people. Anyone who was able to enter the plane was not ordinary. The four of them were the same. If someone saw the four of them, they would be in awe. That was because the four of them were Annihilation class elites. They were all 6th-tier Annihilation class elites. The four of them were the Holy Soldier race's 4 6th-tier Annihilation class elites. Regarding the plane, the Holy Soldier race had access to literature and information. They knew more about it than any other faction. They knew about the important places of the plane. Lewis Bing and the others were able to find Red Land and the Red Flame Fruit Tree because of that. The giant stone door that was 300 feet tall closed, but it was not a problem for the four of them. The four of them flew over the giant stone door. They were going to enter a palace. Just as the four of them were about to get close to the palace, something weird happened. Pang! The four of them hit an invisible barrier. They were blocked outside the palace. A middle-aged man with a black beard coldly grunted. His right hand became a sharp blade. The sharp blade was wrapped with white bones. It was surrounded by a gold light. He slashed toward the invisible barrier. Boom! There was a loud noise. The whole mountain shook. Surprisingly, the strong strike hit the invisible barrier. It did not damage the invisible barrier. This is weird. Let's attack together. The middle-aged man with the black beard looked serious. He spoke to the other three. The other three did not have a problem with that. They all attacked with the middle-aged man with the black beard. Rumble. For Annihilation class level 6 attacks, hit the invisible barrier. The giant mountain shook even harder, but the invisible barrier did not break. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The faces of the four turned serious, and then they attacked together again. Terrifying rumbling sounds continued to ring out, and dazzling fireworks continued to bloom on the invisible barrier. The giant mountain trembled nonstop, but for a good while, the invisible barrier still did not shatter. Let's stop. If I'm not wrong, this is probably a spatial barrier. With our strength, it's impossible for us to break it. The old man among the four stopped his attack and said with a frown. When the other three heard his words, they also stopped and frowned. This is bad. The protective barrier is actually a spatial barrier. Although the three of them did not realize that the invisible barrier was a spatial barrier like the old man, they knew that the spatial barrier was a derivative ability of spatial laws. They knew how sturdy the spatial barrier was, so when they heard that the invisible barrier was a spatial barrier, they frowned. I didn't think that after so many years, the protective barrier would still be intact. The other of the two middle-aged men, a middle-aged man with a brown beard, frowned. After all, it was once the residence of a rule-level contender. Naturally, it's different from ordinary buildings. The middle-aged woman had a good figure, and when she frowned, she had a unique charm. What do we do now? With the defensive strength of the spatial barrier, the four of us can't break it. I'm afraid only the Elder Ancestor can do it himself. The Elder Ancestor has already entered the Void Zone. No one can say for sure when he'll return. The old man shook his head. A rule-level contender could go out for years, decades, or even centuries. No one knew how long it would take for the Elder Ancestor to return. Although there was an emergency contact method, It could not be used unless it was absolutely necessary. Do we have to give up? The black-bearded, middle-aged man looked unwilling. No, we still have a chance. After tens of thousands of years, even if the spatial barrier runic circle was created by a rule-level contender, it's bound to be damaged. It's certainly far from what it was before. The old man said with certainty, "The four of us can't break it, but if we gather all the factions in this dimension, we might be able to break it. But if that's the case, we won't be able to monopolize this palace." The middle-aged woman was somewhat hesitant. This dimension is already beginning to collapse. It might not be able to hold on until the elder ancestor returns. It's better not to monopolize it than to get nothing. The old man shook his head and said confidently, "Moreover, with the strength of the four of us, what's there to be afraid of?" I agree. I agree too. After listening to the old man's explanation, the middle-aged woman and the other two middle-aged men nodded in agreement. Soon after, a piece of news spread rapidly in the dimension. When the various clans and factions received the news, they rushed toward this palace complex. The former residence of a rule-level contender has been discovered. Hearing the words of the dozen or so people, Gray's eyes lit up. Although the harvest this time was already great, he naturally would not miss out on an even greater harvest. If one were to ask where the most precious item was in this dimension, it would undoubtedly be the residence of a rule-level contender. Perhaps there would be a rule-level weapon. Even if there was no rule-level weapon, there was a high possibility that there would be the blood of a rule-level blood beast. After all, that almighty beast was obviously killed by a rule-level contender, so there would inevitably be blood left behind. Whoosh! Using his teleportation ability, Gray instantly appeared in front of the dozen or so people, blocking their path. Appearing in an instant, teleportation ability. It's him. It must be him. Seeing Gray blocking their path, the dozen or so people could not help but change their expressions. After the battle with Louis Bing, Gray's name had spread throughout the dimension. Every clan and faction that entered the dimension knew about Gray. Seeing Gray appear using his teleportation ability, the dozen or so people immediately recognized Gray's identity. "Sorry to disturb you. I'm stopping you all because I have something to ask you all." Gray wasn't overbearing. It wasn't his character to take advantage of his valiant strength to do whatever he wanted. "Please speak, sir." Seeing that Gray's attitude was amiable and not arrogant, the dozen or so people heaved a sigh of relief. One of the women said, as long as he was not looking for trouble, it was fine. Although there were more than a dozen of them, there were two Annihilation class elites among them. If they had a conflict with him, no one would have been able to escape. "I just heard you say that you found a palace that seems to be the residence of a rule-level elite. Is this news reliable?" Gray asked. "The news is reliable," the woman replied. "Someone from a clan that is familiar with my clan has already rushed there and seen the palace." "That's right. Where exactly is that palace located?" Although he could still reach it by following the dozen or so people, it was obvious that he would be faster. "We have an extra dimension map here. The palace is marked on it. I'll give it to you, sir." The woman took out a map and handed it to Gray. The map had been sent out by the Holy Soldier race. In order to lure people from all factions, the Holy Soldier race had sent out the map and marked the palace's location. Now, almost every faction had such a map. The woman did not mind doing Gray a favor. "Thank you." Gray reached out and took it. After glancing at it, he confirmed the palace's location. After nodding at the woman, he quickly teleported in that direction. Teleporting was a place he had never been to before. He could not teleport thousands of miles or even tens of thousands of miles in an instant. However, it was still faster than relying on speed to travel. In just half an hour, Gray appeared in front of the giant mountain and saw the group of palaces. Around the group of palaces, many factions had already arrived. Some had set up tents to rest. Some surrounded the group of palaces and tried to enter, but they were blocked by a barrier. I knew it. After seeing the map in his hand, Gray already had a guess. Now, his guess had been confirmed. Although the map the woman gave him was a little different from the real landscape, it was still very detailed. In such a short time, it was impossible for any faction to draw it unless they had it from the beginning. All signs pointed to a faction, leading all the factions to that place. All the factions were blocked outside the palace. Gray could even guess what they were planning to do. They wanted to gather the power of all the factions to break the palace's defensive barrier. Someone else is here. Seeing Gray arrive, many factions looked at him. Everyone who came was a competitor, so they naturally had to pay attention to him. It's him. When some factions saw that it was just a young man, they looked away without interest. They felt that Gray could not be their competitor. However, when some factions saw Gray, their pupils involuntarily shrank. They had heard that Gray had defeated Louis Bing and had seen Gray's appearance. Although the other party was only one person, his strength was extremely powerful. He had grasped the mysterious spatial rule power, and he alone was comparable to a top force. Other than the Sacred Weapon clan and the two strongest clans, no other force could suppress him. Such a person naturally made them wary. I never thought that Louis Bing would be defeated by him. A sexy woman with black hair and red lips stared at Gray. Her face was full of fear. When she saw Gray attack at the entrance of the plane, she was confident that she had the strength to win. But now, it seemed that she had overestimated herself. He's the one who defeated Louis Bing. Like her, there were many people of the younger generation who looked at Gray with surprise, shock, and fear. When they saw Gray arrive, the ones who had the biggest reaction were the younger generation. Louis Bing was an insurmountable mountain above their heads. Now, this mountain had been crossed by Gray. One could imagine how shocked they were. Chapter 740. This is a space barrier. After landing in front of the palace, Gray looked at the palace. To the others, there was an invisible barrier around the palace, but to him, the barrier was clearly visible. With the ability of the spatial law, Gray could easily determine that this barrier, which was invisible to others, was a spatial barrier. It is no wonder why this is the residence of a rule-class elite. It has a space barrier as a defensive barrier. Gray knew how strong the space barrier was. With his first-stage annihilation class, he was confident that he could create a barrier that even a sixth-stage annihilation class elite could not break. One could imagine how strong the barrier was. The defensive barrier is a space barrier. This is troublesome. Looking inside the palace, Gray frowned. If it were any other barrier, he was confident that he could teleport in, but he was not confident about a space barrier. The space barrier had the effect of isolating space. Teleportation might not be able to pass through it. Of course, he had to give it a try. He tried to use his teleportation ability. Buzz! Space ripples appeared. Just as he was about to succeed, he was suddenly blocked by a barrier. The teleportation failed. As he had expected, the space barrier isolated space, causing the teleportation to fail. If I can't teleport in, I can only break the space barrier. Can I really do that? Gray frowned. He knew the plan of attracting all the factions, but he was not optimistic. The protective space barrier of a rule-class elite's residence had to be stronger than the space barrier he built with his space power. At its peak, even a rule-class elite would find it difficult to break it in a short time. Even if he built a space barrier with his space power, the factions present might not be able to break it if they work together, let alone the protective space barrier of a rule-class elite's residence. Now, he could only hope that the space barrier's formation pattern had decayed and weakened because it had existed for tens of thousands of years. Otherwise, the factions present would not have a chance even if they worked together. After finding an open space far away from the palace, Gray set up a tent and rested. He waited like the others, waiting for all the factions to arrive. After a few days, the number of people around the palace doubled again. Almost all the people who had entered the dimension had arrived. At this time, the sacred soldier race began to stand up and gather all the factions to attack the space barrier. With the prestige of the sacred weapon tribe in the divine weapon territory, it was not difficult to get all the forces to heed the call. Furthermore, the various forces were also very willing to cooperate. They also hoped to join forces to break the spatial barrier. Not long after, all the forces stood by the side of the palace, each in their strongest state, ready to attack at any time. Let's attack together. When the Sacred Soldier Race's sixth-tier Annihilation Elder spoke, everyone unleashed their own attacks. Flames that were so hot that they could melt all magical metals, lightning that roared like heavenly punishment, and poisonous fog that was so corrosive that it could even corrode gold-tier weapons. The multicolored abilities of the blood fiends mixed together, creating a scene that was more dazzling and magnificent than any fireworks. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Terrifying explosions continued to ring out, and the palace complex and the huge mountain trembled violently. If not for the fact that the entire mountain and the palace complex were one and had been reinforced by runes, perhaps it would have collapsed from the violent tremors. Everyone used their full strength, and Gray also used his time law ability. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour, 1 hour. An hour had passed, and the space barrier still had not been broken. It was still there, like an iron wall that could never be broken. After attacking for an hour, everyone had used up a lot of their blood power. They all stopped to recover their blood power. They all frowned. They had not been able to break through in an hour, so the result was obvious, but they were still very unwilling to give up. The place where the Rule class elite lived was right in front of them. They might even have Rule weapons, but they were blocked by an invisible barrier. They could not enter. I knew it, Gray sighed. His guess had been confirmed. In terms of understanding of the spatial barrier, no one present could compare to him. Before he made his move, he had already expected this outcome, and the result was just as he had expected. Even if all the forces attacked together, they were still unable to break through the spatial barrier. Pa! 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 Someone was walking toward him. He turned his head and saw Louis Bing walking toward him. His heart jumped. He was worried that the man would go back on his word. Although the man's face was cold, he did not have any evil intentions. He was relieved. I still don't know your name? Louis Bing asked as he walked up to Gray. His face was cold, and he looked unapproachable. However, it could be seen that he was not good at expressing his emotions. This was the truth. Ever since he was born, his family had placed high hopes on him. He had been given an extremely high status. In front of the other children, he had to maintain the image of an outstanding child. In front of the elders, he had to appear calm. Over time, he was no longer good at showing his emotions on his face. He always looked cold and unapproachable. Gray Fergus. Gray nodded and reported his name. Even with your teleportation ability, you can't enter it? Louis Bing's voice was slightly doubtful. I can't. The space barrier has the effect of isolating space. Even with my teleportation ability, I can't avoid the space barrier and enter. Gray shook his head. Then can you find the weak point of the space barrier? Louis Bing asked again. Find the weak point of the space barrier? You want to break the space barrier from its weak point? Hearing the other party's question, Gray immediately understood what he meant. Yes, can you do it? Louis Bing asked with anticipation. I'm not sure, but I can try. After hesitating for a while, Gray answered. He had never tried it before, so he was not sure if he could find the weak point of the space barrier. I represent the Holy Soldier race to ask you to try. If you succeed, you can make a request of the Holy Soldier race. As long as it's not too much, the Holy Soldier race will agree to it. Deal. Gray agreed. Soon, he flew up and flew toward the palace. Breaking the space barrier was also what he wanted. Plus, the Holy Soldier race had given him a condition, so he was more than happy to do it. Buzz. He used his space power. A thread of space ripple that even an Annihilation Class 6th level elite could not detect appeared. The space barrier became clear in front of Gray's eyes. He could even see the width and thickness of the space barrier. He started to fly around the palace, checking every space barrier. He was looking for a place where the space barrier was weak. Found it. Outside a palace that was not too big, Gray found a place where the space barrier was weak. Compared to the space barriers in other places, the space barrier there was only half as thick. Is it a hole in the rune matrix itself? Or is it because the rune matrix is broken? After observing it for a while, Gray's rune level was not enough to determine what caused it. He did not want to look into it. He memorized the place and started to search around the palace. After spending a full hour, Gray finally finished inspecting all the palaces. From this, it was not difficult to see how huge the palaces were. How is it? Seeing Gray return, Louis Bing hurried over. There was a middle-aged man with a black beard with him. He was one of the Holy Soldier race's 4/6th level Annihilation class elites. We found 6 spots in total. The weakest one is in the south. Gray pointed at a palace in the south. Good. Very good. If you can break the space barrier, the Holy Soldier race's promise will not change. As long as it is not too much, the Holy Soldier race will agree to it. Hearing Gray's answer, the middle-aged man with the black beard was excited. Boom, boom, boom. Not long later, everyone gathered near the palace that Gray had pointed out. They started to attack again. There was a scary loud noise. There were bright fireworks. The ground was shaking violently. It kept happening. Half an hour later, catch-up. There was a crisp sound. In Gray's eyes, there were some small cracks on the surface of the space barrier. It was like glass that had been cracked. It works. Keep going. Other people could not see the space barrier as clearly as Gray, but some people with sharp ears heard the sound of the space barrier cracking. They were very excited. Catch-up, catch-up, catch-up. As the attacks continued, the cracks became bigger. In the end, the invisible space barrier was like glass that had been broken. The attacks were no longer obstructed. They fell into the palace. They were released inside the palace. Fortunately, the palace had been solidified by the rune. It did not collapse under the attacks. The space barrier is broken. Quick, let's go. All the factions looked excited as they rushed toward the space barrier's breach. At this moment, even the prestige of the Holy Soldier race was not very useful. No faction was afraid of the Holy Soldier race. The Holy Weapon race was the strongest faction in the Holy Weapon territory. This time, the powers of the people who came were very strong. That was especially true of the 4/6-tier Annihilation class elites. The moment the space barrier broke, they became 4 beams of light that went inside. In terms of speed, no one was faster than Gray, who could teleport. In terms of speed, even the 6th-tier Annihilation elites were not as fast as him. So, with one teleport, he appeared in the palace. With another teleport, he appeared in a palace that was far away from this palace. Earlier, when he was looking for a weak point in space, he was not just looking for a palace. He was also secretly checking out all the palaces. He wanted to know which palaces would give him more rewards. After entering, he immediately teleported to a palace that he thought would give him a big reward. Chapter 741. Whoosh! Gray appeared in front of palace. It wasn't too big, and its style leaned towards classical simplicity. The quality of the stone used wasn't low, and many of them were top-grade room materials. However, the color of these top-grade room materials was dark, making this palace less conspicuous than other palaces. The reason he chose such a place was because he judged that this palace should be an alchemy room. As a rank 3 alchemy master, Gray was very familiar with the style of alchemy rooms. Although it was from tens of thousands of years ago and was very different from today's alchemy rooms, some of the main positions hadn't changed, so he chose this place. Pushing open the door, a medicinal fragrance wafted out, confirming Gray's judgment that this was indeed an alchemy room. What appeared in front of Gray were several alchemy tables made of metal. On the alchemy tables, various utensils and alchemy-related rune items were densely arranged. Gray roughly swept his eyes over them and couldn't help but become excited. All kinds of alchemy utensils were polished from extremely rare crystals. Some crystal utensils had the property of absolutely not being contaminated with medicinal liquid, so they could avoid contamination of medicinal liquid to the greatest extent. Some crystal utensils had the property of promoting the fusion of medicinal efficacies, increasing the success rate of alchemy. In short, all of these were high-end goods that were difficult to buy with money. Gray unceremoniously swept them all away, even the metal tables, and stuffed them into the space. He now had the ability to open up the space, and it was growing every day, so he didn't need to worry about the lack of space. Leaving this room, Gray went deeper inside, and a huge room full of medicine cabinets appeared in front of him. Every medicine cabinet drawer was labeled with medicinal herbs. With a cursory glance, the variety was extremely complete, from commonly used medicinal herbs to magic herbs that could be used as the main ingredient of a rank 5-mana potion. Hurricane vine, ice pistol flower, poison mist grass, Gray successively opened several drawers that could be used as the main ingredient of a rank 5-mana potion and found that they were all filled with medicinal herbs. The quantity was different, with more than a dozen stalks and less than a few stalks. Although tens of thousands of years had passed, these medicinal herbs had miraculously not rotted. He found that there were rune patterns on the surface of the medicine cabinet. The medicine cabinet should also be a type of rune item. It was because of this that the medicinal effects could be preserved. With a cursory glance, Gray discovered that there were all main ingredients for mana potions that corresponded to the metamorphosis of space rule ability and time rule ability. Gray couldn't help but feel excited. With these main ingredients, as long as he could find a suitable alchemist, he would have all the supplementary cultivation resources he needed. Gray no longer flipped through them one by one. With a wave of his hand, he stuffed the medicine cabinets into his spatial item one after another. There was no hurry to check his gains. Now was the time to race against time. He had to visit a few more palaces before the others arrived. After leaving the herb room and entering through another door, Gray found himself in a courtyard. The courtyard was surrounded by houses. Pushing open the door and entering the room, he found that these rooms were resting rooms. Other than a few books related to medicinal herbs, he didn't find anything else. After confirming that there were no more treasures in this palace, Gray teleported and appeared in front of another palace. Someone has arrived before me. The door to the palace was open. When Gray had been observing the palace complex, the door to this palace was obviously closed. Obviously, someone had already entered, and the other party should have been aiming for this goal from the beginning. Otherwise, it would be impossible for them to arrive here so quickly. This time, many people had entered the dimension. Of course, there were many smart people. If Gray could think of choosing a target beforehand, there were others who could have thought of it. After entering the door, Hansun saw a giant hall. In the hall, there were many weapon racks. There were many magic weapons on the racks. That was the storage room. It was used to store the magic weapons. The weapon rack closest to the door was empty. In the hall, there was a person quickly sweeping through the weapons racks. He put the weapons into his own spatial item. This was a middle-aged man. His appearance was quite pleasing to the eye, but there was a hideous scar on his left eyebrow, making his face look slightly frightening. Normally, with the recovery power of an Annihilation class elite, no matter how serious an injury was, it would not leave a scar. For the man to have a scar on his left eyebrow meant the injury was not normal. Gray recognized this person. Out of the 7 6th-tier Annihilation class elites, he was the only one who did not belong to any faction. The man was like Gray. He came from the same dimension. He used his own power to break through the barrier of the dimension and enter the original world. He had only been in the original world for a few hundred years, yet he had reached the 6th tier of Annihilation class. A person like that was not simple. Since the man had been eyeing the storage room, it was not difficult to see that. Schwa! The man noticed Gray's arrival. His eyes were like knives as they stared at Gray for a while. He then moved away. He kept putting the magic weapons that seemed to be of a high level into his spatial item. Gray was a bit scared. He kept a distance from the man. He was just like the man. He put the magic weapons into his spatial item. Quickly, the magic weapons in the hall were all taken by the two of them. They went to the other rooms to search. Could this be a legacy weapon? Gray entered the room. In the entire room, there was only one weapon rack. The weapon rack was very big. It was made of high-class gold silk wood. On the weapon rack, there was a gun. It was not activated, but it was glowing with a green light. No matter where it was placed or how weird the gun was, it was enough to tell that it was a very high-level gun. Hansun picked up the gun. He put his blood power into it and tried to activate it. There was a dangerous presence. It was enough to make even an Annihilation class elite feel threatened. It really is a legacy weapon. Gray's eyes looked bright. A weapon that could activate such a presence had to be a legacy weapon. It was an extremely rare legacy weapon. Legacy weapons could be passed down in a top-class family for generations. The circle of top-class families treated legacy weapons as the wealth of the family. One could imagine how rare legacy weapons were. Who would have thought that he would be so lucky to find one in the armory? Gray put away the legacy weapon and left the room. He quickly went to another room. This room was about the same size as the previous one. Even the layout was similar. The innermost part of the room also had a gold silkwood weapon rack. There was also a weapon on the rack, but it was not a gun. It was a knife. It was a saber that was filled with a demonic aura. It was purple in color, but there were spots of light on its surface that looked like stars. Gray quickly put away the knife. He left the room and went to another room. The third room had a battle axe. The fourth room had a pair of claws. They all looked very special. Gray put them into a space item. After leaving the fourth room, Gray stepped into another room. At this time, another foot stepped into the room. It was the middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow. Gray and the man searched left and right. After searching around, they met in the last room that had not been searched. Gray looked at the man with fear. After putting some distance between them, he looked at the last room. The room had the same layout. The innermost part of the room also had a weapon rack. Surprisingly, the weapon rack did not have a magic weapon. To be precise, it was not a complete magic weapon. It should be a part of a magic weapon. From the appearance, it should be the tip of a sword-shaped weapon. It was golden as if it was poured with gold. It was not activated, but it emitted a golden light. It exuded an extremely terrifying aura. The aura was even stronger than the 4 legacy weapons Gray had obtained. Suddenly, Gray felt a tremor in his body. It was as if something was vibrating in his body. Something was about to come out of his right hand. It was the golden sword that Gray had obtained from the realm. It was a very special sword. It was different from ordinary weapons. It could be integrated into the body. He judged that it should be a rule-level magic weapon. However, because it had been damaged, its power had disappeared. In his hand, other than being able to integrate into his body and being extremely hard, there was nothing special about it. What's going on? Could it be? Suppressing the golden sword's movement, Gray looked at the half of the sword tip in shock. He thought of the huge mural he had seen before. According to the mural, there should have been many rule-level experts fighting. After the battle, the golden sword had broken, and the remaining half of the sword tip had disappeared. Now that half of the golden sword tip had appeared in front of him and caused the golden sword to move, he could not help but suspect that this half of the golden sword tip was the broken part of the golden sword. Whoosh! The middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow quickly pounced at the golden sword tip. Although he could not sense the golden sword's movement in Gray's body, he could tell that the golden sword tip was extraordinary. After all, its aura was even more powerful than a legacy weapon. This half of the sword tip came from the golden sword. Perhaps I can use this to recover the golden sword's power. I have to get it. Seeing the middle-aged man pounce at the golden sword tip, Gray's expression changed. His instinct told him that the golden sword tip would be very useful to him. He had to get it. Schwa! Just as the middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow was about to touch the golden sword tip became a golden light. It avoided the middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow and landed in Gray's hand. The middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow was a 6th-tier Annihilation Elite. He was very fast. Plus, the room was only a few dozen feet wide. Even if Gray used teleportation, he would not be able to make it. Gray still had his metal power. He used his metal power to move the golden sword tip. He successfully took the golden sword tip. Give it to me. The middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow turned around. He saw the golden sword tip in Gray's hand. His voice was cold. A cold, murderous air came out his body. It was like he was going to freeze Gray. Chapter 742. What? Gray coldly laughed. He put the sword tip into his space item. He coldly looked at the middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow. Because I'm stronger than you. The middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow waved his hand. The black shadow substance became a giant hand. It almost covered the entire room. It blocked off all of Gray's escape routes. It grabbed the air and went for Gray. Pang! It was a loud crashing sound. The shadow substance giant hand stopped a few feet away from Gray. It could not go any further. An invisible space shield blocked in front of Gray, protecting him. I admit that you are stronger than me, but if you think you can beat me just because you're stronger than me, I am afraid you will be disappointed. Gray coldly looked at the middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow and coldly spoke. Arrogant. The attack did not do anything to Gray. Hearing that Gray was not going to compromise, the middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow looked gloomy. After becoming a 6th-tier Annihilation class elite, no matter where he went, he was met with respectful and fearful gazes. In front of him, ordinary top-notch clans would lower themselves. They wouldn't dare to put on the airs of a top-notch clan for fear of angering him. Even the 2 most powerful clans would be polite to him. Over time, he had gotten used to being high and mighty. Now, a 1st-tier Annihilation class little guy dared to challenge him. It made him feel very ashamed. Crack! Crack! Changes suddenly appeared on the surface of his body. Yellow hair grew out of his hands, and sharp claws grew out of them. Tiger stripes appeared on his forehead and face. His eyes were filled with a ferocious, beast-like presence. His muscles expanded. It made him, who was already very strong, look like a ferocious beast. Boom! His aura skyrocketed, and a terrifying aura spread out from his body. Then he stretched out his sharp claws, which were suffused with black light. Several scratches were left in the air, and the space seemed to be torn apart as he grabbed at Gray. Beast rule. Seeing the middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow change, Gray squinted his eyes. He recognized the power he was using. Beast rule. Gray had read about a rule power in some books. It was a rule power that turned one's body into a rule beast. It gave one more power. Generally speaking, any blood warrior who was at the berserker level or above could imitate a part of the blood fiend's body characteristics. However, this kind of imitation was forcefully imitated using the blood force, so the structure of the body did not change. Beast rule changed the body. It was a change on the body. After the change, it gave one a lot of power. Boom! The sharp claws hit the space barrier, and a terrifying loud bang sounded. A tsunami-like shock wave spread out in all directions with the collision as the center. The room that Gray and the middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow were in, and even the entire palace was torn apart by the terrifying shockwave. Fortunately, the whole group of palaces had been reinforced with runes. Otherwise, it would not have been just this one palace that was affected. It would have affected all the buildings. As the dust settled, Gray and the middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow appeared. The middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow kept his claws a few feet away from Gray. Gray, who was a few feet away, did not even have a speck of dust on him. He was not injured. The space shield defense was just as Gray had expected. It blocked the full power attack of the man. Even Annihilation Level 6 rule power attack could not break the space shield. Do you want to continue? Gray coldly looked at the middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow and coldly laughed. Humph! The middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow coldly grunted. He looked scared. He stared at Gray and quickly went to the other palaces. Gray's powerful defense made him scared. If he spent too much time with Gray, the good stuff in the palace would be taken by others. Those 2 reasons made him decide to let Gray go for now. With a lot of noise, the whole palace was blown away by the powerful shockwave. It attracted the attention of many people. He forced a level 6 Annihilation class elite to retreat. Seeing Gray fight with the middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow and force him to retreat, many people were shocked. At the same time, they were very scared. They decided to avoid fighting with Gray. After all, Gray was someone who could force a level 6 Annihilation class elite to retreat. Level 6 Annihilation class? With a cold laugh, Gray used teleportation. When he appeared again, he was in front of a palace that was quite far away from where he had just been. He had a fight with a level 6 Annihilation class elite. In his heart, he was not too worried. Although he could not beat him, he could still protect himself. Creak! Pushing the door open, he saw rows and rows of bookshelves. He randomly picked up a book to read. The book was made of leather. Even though it had been a few thousand years, aside from the words being a bit dim, the pages had not decayed. The collection of a rule-level powerhouse was naturally extremely precious, and it was of great use to Gray. He put all the books and the bookshelves into his space item. In the end, there were too many books. The space item could not hold them all. He had to put them all into his own space. Where should I go next? After leaving the palace, Gray did not use teleportation again. He felt like he could get a lot out of the 3 places, but he had already visited them. The rest of the places were places he could not figure out what to do with. He randomly found a palace. Gray stepped inside. It was a palace that served as a residence. The palace had signs that had been rummaged through. Clearly, someone had already visited it. He looked around. He did not see anything of value. Gray quickly left the palace and went to a nearby palace. There were already 4 people in the palace. He did not know if they were the people who had visited the previous palace. When they saw Gray arrive, their bodies became tense. They looked serious and alert. They did not see the fight between Gray and a level 6 Annihilation class elite, but they knew Gray had defeated Louis Bing. With Gray's power to defeat Louis Bing, normal top-class families would not be able to beat him even if they used all of their power. Plus, they were from big families. Gray scanned the interior of the palace. Seeing that the palace wasn't anything good, he left the palace. Seeing him leave, the 4 couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Gray had given them too much pressure. Now, Gray was not from a top-class family, but he was a top-class family. He went in and out of a few palaces. Some had been visited, and some had not. He did not get much out of them. Gray was going to explore a palace next to him. At that moment, boom, a violent rumbling sound suddenly rang out, and the ground began to tremble violently, as if an earthquake had occurred, violently shaking. What is going on? Gray jumped. He jumped to the top of the palace, which was 300 feet tall. He looked around. He quickly found where the movement was coming from. In the east, a bright yellow palace stood tall, but at this time, it was covered by an earthy yellow light shield. Earlier, when he was looking for the weak point of the space shield, Gray was sure there was no yellow light shield around the palace. The people who were searching must have triggered the ruin of the palace. Around the palace, there were 10 people. They were all attacking the palace. 2 of them were attacking with the strongest power. One of them looked like a middle-aged lady. Her neck had a giant red gem. She was a level 6 Annihilation class elite from a super family. The other person was a middle-aged woman. Her body was curvy. She was a level 6 Annihilation class elite from the Holy Soldier race. Catcha! The defensive barrier was obviously not as strong as the spatial barrier. Under the attacks of the dozen or so people, especially the 2 middle-aged women, the barrier shattered with a cracking sound after a flash of light. The dozen or so people quickly rushed into the palace, and the 2 middle-aged women were at the forefront. So. Many people were running toward the palace. They had set up a defense shield inside the palace. The palace was definitely not ordinary. So, Gray used teleportation to appear in front of the palace door. He quickly ran into the palace. Space skill. After entering the palace, Gray noticed something strange. From the outside, the palace was not bigger than the other palaces. After entering the palace, Gray noticed that the palace was unusually big. The space inside was a few times bigger than normal palaces. According to his judgment, this palace should have been built using some kind of spatial technique to expand the internal space. It was a big space. Everything was big. A stone pillar was 30 feet long. A crystal rune lamp was 30 feet long and half a foot wide. It was like a giant torch. A chair was big enough to fit a few adults. Everything was big. He did not know if the things were built to be that big, or if they were made bigger as the space expanded. This decorative weapon is a legacy weapon. This metal frame is made from star gold. This vase is actually carved from a whole piece of rainbow gemstone. After entering the palace, everyone was excited. Even the 2 middle-aged women in gray, who had seen a lot, were excited. Inside the palace, every item, even if it was an inconspicuous decoration, was worth a lot. If they were auctioned, they would be sold for a sky-high price. Like a swarm of locusts passing through, they looted everything, not even leaving behind a single ornament because it was very likely to be some kind of precious material that was priceless. In front of them, 2 giant doors appeared. The 2 middle-aged women reached out at the same time. They each pushed a door open. Buzz! The moment the door was opened, a suppressive power covered the sky and the ground. It was like there was a sky and a ground coming down on them. Chapter 743. What a powerful aura! Gray's expression changed. Even with his current strength, He could not help but feel extremely pressured. The aura was so strong that it even surpassed the aura emitted by the giant beast skeleton. Looking inside through the two giant doors, he saw that in the deepest part of the palace, on a platform that was dozens of meters tall, there was a huge golden throne. Sitting on the golden throne was a person, or more accurately, a skeleton. The skeleton wore a silver robe with purple starry spots, and a powerful aura was emitted from its body. Seeing the skeleton, Gray could not help but sigh. This person should be the Lorang powerhouse who had created this plane. Even if a Lorang powerhouse had a lifespan of tens of thousands of years, there would still be a day when their lifespan reached its limit. Unless one became a legendary god with an endless lifespan, they would not be able to escape the shackles of their lifespan. However, becoming a god was easier said than done. Throughout the history of the origin world, there was no way to confirm the existence of a god, let alone becoming one. Therefore, many Lorang powerhouses who had once dominated the origin world could not escape the fate of exhausting their lifespan and becoming skeletons in the end. Whoosh! Whoosh! Two middle-aged women were rushing towards a stone platform made of gemstones in front of the skeleton. On the stone platform, there was a silver book. It was a book made from the bones of a blood fiend that had been polished into thin sheets. A book of laws, Gray exclaimed. He immediately used his teleportation ability and appeared before the stone platform, reaching out to grab the silver book. This was not the first time he had seen a book made of the bones of a Lorang blood fiend. Previously, he had obtained a book in the wreckage of a giant runic ship in the Spectre Zone. It recorded the precious spatial law blood technique, and he was now cultivating the secret technique in this book. Although he did not know what was recorded in this book, if it was made of the bones of a Lorang blood fiend, the content recorded was definitely not simple. It was very likely that it recorded content that was no less valuable than the spatial law blood technique. Stop! Seeing Gray teleport and reach out to grab the silver book, the two middle-aged women's expressions changed as they attacked Gray. Whoosh! The middle-aged woman from the sacred weapon race used her right hand as a saber, and a sharp golden saber light containing a terrifying aura of sharpness shot towards Gray. Whoosh! The middle-aged woman from the strongest clan unsheathed her sword. A black light shot out from her sword towards Gray. The black light was like a black hole that could devour light. After it appeared, the light in the palace suddenly dimmed. Crackle! After the two attacks appeared, the inside of the palace was suddenly filled with raging winds. Gravel kept falling, and the originally sturdy palace was actually on the verge of collapse. Two 6th-tier Annihilation elites are attacking me at the same time. They really think highly of me. Sensing the two terrifying attacks coming from behind, Gray immediately understood that the middle-aged woman from the Sacred Weapon clan and the middle-aged woman from the Strongest clan were attacking him at the same time. Using his spatial ability, Gray prepared to erect a defensive barrier to block the attacks of the two and snatch the silver book. At this moment, a hair-raising sense of danger made his hair stand on end. This sense of danger was even more intense than the sense of danger brought by the middle-aged woman from the Sacred Weapon tribe and the middle-aged woman from the most powerful clans. And the source of this sense of danger was actually the silver book. Whoosh! The space barrier was replaced by teleportation. Gray instantly teleported far away, evading the attacks of the two middle-aged women and distancing himself from the silver book. Blurk! The gold knife light and the black light pierced through the palace. The silver book was blasted away by the shockwave of their attacks. Whoosh! The two middle-aged women were heading for the silver book. When they were close to the silver book, they did not hesitate to attack each other. Boom! The middle-aged woman from the Sacred Weapon clan's right hand turned into a knife, and the sword of the middle-aged woman from the most powerful clan clashed. A scary shockwave spread everywhere. The palace could not withstand it anymore. The shockwave of the battle was torn apart. Pata! The two of them were forced back by each other's attacks, but the middle-aged woman from the most powerful clan was closer to the silver book. In a flash, she appeared next to the silver book. She grabbed the silver book. This book is mine. Her face looked excited. A book that was made from the bones of a rule-class blood beast must have been very valuable. It might have contained rule-class blood skills and a way to break through to rule class. Now, she was struggling to figure out how to take the final step to rule class. After taking the book, she would have to face the threat of 4 6th-tier annihilation elites from the Sacred Weapon clan, but she was not worried. Earlier, she had secretly formed an alliance with another 6th-tier annihilation elite from the most powerful clan. It was a middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow. With the power of the 3 of them, facing 4 6th-tier annihilation elites, although they were not strong enough to beat them, they were confident they could protect themselves. While the middle-aged woman from the most powerful clan was excited, something weird happened. Shwa! In the silver book, a white light shadow appeared. It looked like a human. Before the middle-aged woman from the most powerful clan could react, it went into the body of the middle-aged woman from the most powerful clan. Arg! Arg! The middle-aged woman from the most powerful clan screamed in fear. Her body was shaking. She could not control herself and fell. With a pata sound, she hit the ruins of the palace. In the ruins, the middle-aged woman from the most powerful clan was still rolling around in pain. Her eyes were rolled back, and her body was spasming. Her face was pale, and her expression was ferocious. She looked very scary. A moment later, the middle-aged woman from the most powerful clan stopped struggling. Her eyes were bulging. They were bloodshot. Her expression was ferocious. Blood came out of every orifice. She was dead. Screech! From the body of the middle-aged woman from the most powerful clan, a white light came out. It turned into a human shape and screamed. Hearing that scream, the middle-aged woman from the holy soldier race grunted. Her forehead was covered in a cold sweat as she fell back. The other people in the palace rolled their eyes and fell down. They were all dead. Many of them were annihilation class elites, but they were unable to block it. Pop! Only Gray, who had teleported away and set up a space shield in front of him, was able to block the invisible shockwave. He was not affected. Even so, his face was still pale. His eyes were wide open. He was shocked. A rule-class ghost spirit. After possessing the body, it was able to kill a 6th-tier annihilation class elite. With a scream, even a 6th-tier annihilation class elite was at a disadvantage. Ordinary annihilation class elites were unable to block it and died immediately. That ghost spirit was a rule class. That was close. Gray looked at the rule class ghost with fear. He was so close to becoming one of the dead people. His sharp instincts had saved his life. The ghost possessed the rule book. It was covered by the rule book's presence, so no one was able to detect the ghost's presence. He had soul power, so he was more sensitive to the presence of the ghost than other people. Although he was unable to detect the ghost's presence, he was still able to feel its presence. Under the stimulation of that presence, he felt a strong sense of danger. That was why he had chosen to teleport away. If he had not done that, the middle-aged woman from the most powerful clan would have ended up like him. Ghost! There's a ghost. This is weird. This ghost is not afraid of sunlight. Is it because of the space shield? How can it be so strong? Even an annihilation class elite cannot block its scream. I understand. It is a rule class. It is a rule class elite soul that turned into a ghost after she died. When the others finally arrived, they saw the spirit next to the silver book, as well as the people who had died one after another. Everyone's expression was grave, and the family of the dead middle-aged woman was even more sorrowful. Lady Hannah! No! How could this happen? No! Impossible! Lady Hannah! How could she die? Although they knew exploring a plane like that was dangerous, they did not expect a 6th-tier annihilation class elder in their family to die. That was an unimaginably heavy blow to their family. Their entire family might not be able to recover from it. Screech! Seeing many people appear, the ghost screamed again. Following the screech was a strong soul attack. Arg! Even though they were far away, people could not help but scream in pain. Some of the weaker magic light warriors screamed. Blood came out of their orifices. They died on the spot, just like the people before them. Everyone moved away like they were avoiding a snake or a scorpion. They created a distance of 1 mile. After confirming that the rule class ghost was not chasing them, they looked at the rule class ghost in shock. I did not expect St. Geordie's soul to become a ghost after he died. The level 6 Annihilation class elder of the Holy Soldier race looked scared. If it were a normal ghost, he would not have been scared. A rule class elite had become a ghost after he died. He had to be scared. A rule class elite could control the rules and change the rules. They had great power. Although the ghost they became after they died could not be compared to when they were alive, it was still very scary. The scary soul attack, scary speed, and the fact that it could kill a person in a short amount of time after it possessed made it much stronger than a level 6 Annihilation class being. Plus, the soul was very strong and solid. Ordinary fire and thunder were ineffective. It made it even harder to kill. It must be very attached to the rule book it had when it was alive. It was attached to the rule book. If we do not kill it, we will not be able to get the rule book. A middle-aged woman with a pale face said, "We have to kill it. I have to kill it and obtain the Book of Laws." The black-bearded middle-aged man's eyes were burning as he spoke. Book of Rules was the general name given by Saint grade forces to books made from the bone fragments of blood beasts. Any book made from these bone fragments was extremely precious. Before that, let's clear this place out. The brown-haired, bearded middle-aged man's eyes were cold. He looked around. His focus was on a middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow and an old man with white eyebrows. Everyone, to avoid any misunderstandings, please stay 5 miles away. Chapter 744. Mr. Massimo, your holy soldier race is too overbearing. The old man with white eyebrows coldly grunted. His voice was filled with dissatisfaction. He was a 6th-tier Annihilation elite from another powerful family. At his level, his only goal was to become a rule class elite. If he succeeded, he would have a lifespan of tens of thousands of years. His family would become a saint-class faction that was comparable to the Holy Soldier race. Unfortunately, his family's blood skills did not have the most crucial method to break through to rule class. Therefore, he had an extreme desire for the Book of Laws, which might contain a nomological blood technique. He was very unwilling to let the Book of Laws be snatched away by the Sacred Weapon race. Although the Sacred Weapon race is powerful, isn't it too much to be so unreasonable? The middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow coldly grunted. He had the same reason as the old man with white eyebrows. He desperately wanted the rule book. He did not want the rule book to be taken by the Holy Soldier race. If the two of you are not happy, just stay. The brown-bearded middle-aged man from the Holy Soldier race coldly laughed. He looked at the two of them with a dangerous gaze. Before we attack the rule class spirit, the Holy Soldier race does not mind fighting the two of you first. We will see who wins and who loses. After the brown-bearded middle-aged man said that, the other 3 6th-tier Annihilation elites of the Holy Soldier race cooperated. They looked at the two of them. Their bodies vaguely emitted a dangerous aura. Do not cross the line. Being stared at by 4 elites of the same level, the old man with white eyebrows and the middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow could not help but feel their bodies tighten. Although they were confident in their power, they were not confident enough to fight 2 people of the same level. Their opponents were from the Holy Soldier race. The two of you should leave. The Holy Soldier race must have the rule book. Anyone who wants to fight for it and his family will be the enemy of the Holy Soldier race. The Holy Soldier race elder looked at the old man with white eyebrows and spoke. His words were full of threats. Hearing the threat in the Holy Soldier race elder's words, the old man with white eyebrows was very scared. He had a family behind him. If he broke off with the Holy Soldier race there, his family would be affected. His face kept changing. In the end, he angrily grunted. He took his family members and turned around to leave. He gave up the fight. Between his family and the rule book, he chose his family. What a sacred weapon race. The middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow glanced at the 4 from the sacred weapon race, then glanced at the white-browed old man who had already given up on leaving. He could only reluctantly turn around and retreat. He was alone and didn't have a family, so he wasn't worried about implicating his family. However, he didn't even have the confidence to fight 2 against 4, let alone 1 against 4. Although he was unwilling, he could only give up temporarily. However, if there was a chance later, he would definitely turn back without hesitation. If the rule level specter could injure or even perish together with the four of them, that would be the best. As the old man with white eyebrows and the middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow left, the members of the other clans couldn't help but step back. Even the two of them had given up and retreated, let alone them. As expected, there are no saint-level forces that aren't tyrannical. Gray frowned and looked at the rule-level specter in the distance. He also turned around and retreated too, 5 kilometers away. Although the space shield could block a 6th-tier Annihilation class attack, he lacked a way to fight back. With the speed of the four of them and their understanding of his power, he might not have been able to use a space shield to trap the four of them in a space cage. Of course, this didn't mean that he had given up. Not to mention 5 miles. Even if it was 10 miles, it would only take an instant for him to teleport. He could appear beside the Book of Rules at any time and snatch it. Moreover, if the four of them worked together to deal with the rule-level specter, they might be able to make the rule-level specter stay away from the rulebook and create an opportunity for him. Although he had the specter ability, it didn't mean that he wasn't afraid of this rule-level specter. Although the specter ability could enslave specters, it didn't mean that specters of any level could be enslaved. After all, it was only the magic light level of the Spectre Demon Fox bloodline. Its strongest power was only at the magic light level. It would be fine if he relied on his own ability to create a rule-level specter, but was almost impossible to enslave a naturally occurring rule-level specter. Crackle! Hula! Seeing everyone retreat too. 5 miles away, the 4 Annihilation level 6 elites of the Holy Soldier race started to attack. Some of them had a fire element inheritance weapon in their hands. Some of them had a thunder element inheritance weapon in their hands. Rule-level weapons were very precious to a top-class family. To a sacred faction, they were precious, but they weren't so precious that a faction only had a few of them. Although they couldn't supply all of the Holy Soldier race with them, every Annihilation class member was guaranteed to have one. The 4 inheritance weapons they had were borrowed from the Annihilation class members. To deal with the Spectre, the most effective attack was still thunder and fire elements. Although their powers had fire element powers, they were not as effective as pure thunder and fire element powers. Boom, crackle, crackle, crackle. 4 scary attacks were unleashed. Raging fire and thunder covered the sky. They almost covered the sky. They were going to attack the Rule Class Spectre. So, faced with such an attack, even the Rule Class Spectre could not help but feel threatened. Its body flashed with a solid white light. It displayed a speed that not even a level 6 Annihilation class could match. It dodged one attack after another. This speed was Rule Class speed. Only Rule Class creatures could have such speed. Chance, seeing the Rule Class Spectre leave, Gray's eyes looked bright. He was going to teleport and take the rule book. Just as he was about to teleport, he stopped. The rule book. Where did it go? Where the Rule Class Spectre was, the rule book that should have been, there was nowhere to be found. If he wasn't sure the rule book was there, Gray would have thought the rule book had never existed. It's inside its body? How did the rule book get into its body? He looked at the Rule Class Spectre. He searched the Rule Class Spectre. Gray was shocked to find the rule book floating inside the Rule Class Spectre's body. The Spectre was a creature without a physical body. It could pass through any material. The rule book was made from the bones of a Rule Class blood beast. It was an extremely hard material. It was even harder than a legacy weapon. Now, the rule book, which the Spectre would have passed through once it touched it, had appeared inside the Rule Class Spectre's body. It shocked him. Is the rule book too special? Or is the Rule Class Spectre too special? Gray was shocked. He thought he could take the rule book while the 4 level 6 Annihilation class elites of the Sacred Soldier race were holding back the Rule Class Spectre. He did not expect the rule book to merge into the Rule Class Spectre's body. If he did not kill the Rule Class Spectre, he would not be able to take it. Kill it. Otherwise, we cannot take the rule book. The 4 level 6 Annihilation class elites of the Sacred Soldier race noticed this. They were shocked and attacked the Rule Class Spectre again. Boom! Rumble, rumble, rumble. Boom! Many destructive flames and thunder attacks attacked the Rule Class Spectre. The Rule Class Spectre tried to dodge, but it was still unable to dodge them all. It was brushed by a flame. Its body was burned. If it was a real rule class elite, it could have used its body to block the 4 attacks without any damage. The rule class Spectre was not a rule class elite. It was also a Spectre with low resistance to thunder and fire elements. It could not help but be injured. Screech. The injured rule class Spectre screamed. Its soul shockwave attacked the 4 of them. Facing the soul shockwave, the 4 of them had no way to defend themselves. Their faces turned pale, and their bodies staggered. Fortunately, the 4 of them were level 6 Annihilation class elites. Their souls were extremely powerful. If it had been an ordinary Annihilation class elite, their souls would have been shattered by the soul shockwave. So, after being injured, the rule class Spectre went crazy. After screaming, it went toward the middle-aged woman among the 4 of them. Danger! The middle-aged woman was very alert. She attacked the rule class Spectre while falling back. The other 3 quickly attacked the rule class Spectre. They tried to stop the rule class Spectre from getting close to the middle-aged woman. They wanted to force the rule class Spectre to fall back. Pitter-patter. Under the terrifying attacks, the rule class Spectre was finally forced back. The middle-aged woman let out a sigh of relief. Cold sweat slid down her forehead. Boom! Boom! After the scare, the 4 of them attacked again. With the 4 of them working together, the rule class Spectre was injured from time to time. If this continued, the rule class Spectre would be killed by the 4 of them. The Holy Soldier race chose to attack the rule class Spectre. They do have some confidence. Gray stared at the rule class Spectre. Once the rule class Spectre died, he was ready to snatch it. Suddenly, he turned around and looked to the side. A young man with long black hair walked over. It was the most outstanding disciple of the Holy Soldier race, Louis Bing. The other party walked in front of Gray and looked at the battle in the distance. His voice was calm, but the content made it difficult for Gray to calm down. You want to snatch it? Chapter 745. What do you mean? Gray squinted his eyes and looked at Louis Bing. He did not expect his plan to be seen through. He could not help but wonder if he was being too obvious or if the man was too smart. Do not deny it. You're not the only one who wants to steal it, but you are the one who will succeed the easiest. Looking at Gray, Louis Bing's face was cold. His black eyes stared at Gray. What? You want to stop me? With his plan exposed, Gray did not deny it. He smiled and asked, I cannot stop you. Louis Bing nodded and shook his head. Then what are you doing here? Gray asked with curiosity. I'm here to make a deal. What kind of deal? Gray looked at him with interest. As long as you do not steal it, I can use the favor the Holy Soldier race owes you to get you a chance to read the rulebook. You can read the rulebook. If you can do it, I can agree to it. But I am curious. Why do you want to do this? Gray stared at Louis Bing. He did not expect him to make such a deal. To him, as long as he could see the contents of the rulebook, it did not matter if he got the rulebook or not. The deal the man had made was very tempting. What he did not understand was why the man had come to him to make such a deal. He did not warn the 4th, 6th tier Annihilation elites of the Holy Soldier race to be careful of him. Even if he had the teleportation power, with the 4th, 6th tier Annihilation elites of the Holy Soldier race on guard, the chance of him succeeding was not high. I do not want my family to be enemies with someone who has mastered 2 rules before becoming a rule class elite, Louis Bing said with a serious expression. Louis Bing said with a solemn expression. You found out. Gray's expression changed slightly. In the battle with Louis Bing, although he had used his time law ability and space law ability at the same time, he did not reveal the decay characteristic of his time law ability. He did not expect his opponent to discover it. Not only do you have space rule power, but you also have time rule power. Louis Bing's cold face was filled with seriousness and a trace of shock that had yet to dissipate. Because Gray did not show the decaying characteristic of the law of time. From the beginning, he did not realize that Gray also had the ability of the law of time. However, he made an unexpected discovery in the palace. The master of the palace, who was also the master of laws who had created the realm, possessed both the abilities of the laws of time and the laws of space. He had even recorded some of the characteristics of the abilities of the laws of time and the laws of space in a letter. When he saw the letter and compared it, he was shocked to find that the purple light that increased his speed during the battle with Gray was an application of the time rule ability, or rather, a derivative ability. This shocked him quite a bit. The other party actually had two nomological abilities. This was extremely rare in the history of the Origin world. It would have been fine if such a person did not become an apex nomological powerhouse. But once he became a nomological powerhouse, he would surpass ordinary nomological powerhouses in an extremely short time. It was clearly not worth it to make an enemy of such a person. Thus, when he sensed that Gray was dissatisfied with the sacred weapon race's overbearingness and intended to snatch it, he immediately thought of resolving the conflict. He did not wish for the sacred weapon race to make an enemy of such a person. It was not a good thing for the sacred weapon race. I agree in principle, but can you really convince the sacred weapon race to let me see the Book of Laws? Gray asked doubtfully. It was not that he had not thought of using the favor the sacred weapon race owed him to have them open the Book of Laws for him. But the Book of Laws was an extremely precious item and could be easily copied and spread. The sacred weapon race would very likely not agree, so he decided to snatch it personally. I can. If the sacred weapon race doesn't agree, I'll make a copy for you after reading it. Lewis Bing said with certainty. Lewis Bing said with certainty. He knew that if he could not guarantee this, he would not be able to convince Gray. Deal. Gray agreed. It was naturally best if he could see the Book of Laws without coming into conflict with a Saint-grade organization. He had no reason to refuse. Rumble, rumble, rumble. A scary explosion flattened the palaces within 5 miles and beyond. Half an hour later, there was a sharp soul roar. The 4 6th-tier annihilation elites of the sacred weapon race successfully killed the Rule class spirit. The Book of Laws inside the Rule class spirit's body fell out. A few people took the risk and tried to snatch it. One of them was the middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow. The sacred weapon race was prepared. Aside from the middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow, everyone else was killed. He wants to see the Book of Laws? No, absolutely not. After searching the palaces for a while, there was nothing to show for it. The sky was getting dark. All the factions returned to their tents outside the palaces to rest. The sacred weapon race was having a heated discussion. Lewis Bing suggested that Gray look at the Book of Laws. The brown-bearded, middle-aged man immediately rejected the suggestion. The Book of Laws was different. If other people knew the contents, they could spread it easily. The sacred weapon race would not agree to share the Book of Laws with other factions. We cannot agree to this request. Lewis, tell him to change his request. The 6th-tier annihilation old man shook his head. If he allowed Han's son to see the Book of Laws, it was like the other factions were sharing the Book of Laws with the sacred weapon race. The sacred weapon race would not agree to such a request. Lewis, you should know the consequences of letting him see the Book of Laws. Can you tell me your reason? The 6th-tier annihilation middle-aged woman was very sharp. She sensed that Lewis had a reason for doing this. She did not reject the request. Yes. Lewis Bing nodded with a solemn expression and said, because I do not want the family to become enemies with someone who has not even reached rule class and has already mastered 2 rules. Become enemies with someone who has mastered 2 rules. Hearing Lewis Bing's words, the experts of the sacred weapon race were first stunned, then suddenly shocked. Their expressions became uncertain. Lewis, are you saying he has mastered 2 rule powers? Are you sure you are not mistaken? The middle-aged woman looked at Lewis Bing with a serious expression and asked, even if one had an affinity physique, under normal circumstances, before a person became a rule-level expert, they could only master 1 rule-level ability. Unless this person had an affinity with many abilities, they could only master 2 rule-level abilities before becoming a rule-level expert. In history, such people did exist, but they were too few. They had only seen similar records in some books. She really couldn't believe that they would meet such a person. Lewis, are you sure you are not mistaken? The 6th-tier annihilation old man asked seriously. I'm sure I am not mistaken. Aside from mastering space rule powers, he has also mastered time rule powers. Lewis Bing shook his head and spoke with certainty. Tell me, how do you know he has mastered time rule powers? The black-bearded middle-aged man asked in a low voice. Everyone could see the seriousness on his face. When he fought with me before, he used a kind of purple light. Not only does this purple light possess an extremely strong offensive ability, but it can also increase his speed by several times after attaching to his body, Soldier Lewis said as he recalled. Purple light? And it increased his speed by a few times? The 4 6th-tier Annihilation elites looked at each other. Their eyes were full of seriousness. Based on Lewis Bing's description, they were almost certain that the man had mastered time rule powers. Plus, they had seen space rule powers before. They were certain that the man had mastered time rule powers and space rule powers. Although we are not afraid, there is no need to provoke an enemy with so much potential. Plus, we do owe him a favor. I agree to let him see the rule book. The middle-aged woman's beautiful face was tense as she spoke seriously. Although the man had 2 rule powers, he had not become a rule class elite. It was hard to say whether or not he could become a rule class elite. As of now, the man was not a threat to the Sacred Soldier race. However, the other party's potential was too great. Once he became a law-grade powerhouse, he would definitely become one of the stronger law-grade powerhouses in a very short time. At that time, the other party would be a great threat to the Sacred Weapon race. I agree. The brown-bearded middle-aged man thought for a while and nodded. In that short amount of time, he had already considered whether or not the 4 of them could kill the man. He realized that against the man who had teleportation power, it would be difficult to kill him. If they could not kill him, and the man had so much potential, they had to compromise. If they could use the rule book to build a good relationship with the man, perhaps they could gain a powerful ally for the family in a few hundred years. We do not have a problem with that. The 6th-tier Annihilation Elder and the black-bearded middle-aged man shook their heads. They knew what they should do. Although the Sacred Soldier race was powerful, they were not so powerful that they did not need to compromise. Sometimes, when facing other sacred factions, they needed to compromise. Unknowingly, they had actually subconsciously equated Grey with a Saint-ranked force. Of course, this was under the condition that Grey's potential was taken into consideration. Even so, it was enough to show their fear of Grey, who possessed dual law abilities. Lewis, go and call him over. The rule book cannot be taken away. He can only read it here. He has 1 night to read the rule book. Seeing that the other 3 did not have a problem with that, the middle-aged woman looked at Lewis Bing. Chapter 746. Under Lewis Bing's lead, Grey entered the tent region of the Sacred Weapon race and saw the book of laws they had obtained this time. The silver book was cold to the touch and felt like metal. It was extremely heavy in his hand, even heavier than metal of the same volume. Then I won't disturb you any longer. Lewis Bing nodded at Grey after bringing him to a separate tent and retrieving the book of laws for Grey. Thank you. Grey thanked the other party. Although the other party's goal was for the sake of his clan, and he was afraid of Grey's potential and did his best to avoid conflict with his clan, it was also because of the other party that he was able to avoid conflict with the Sacred Weapon tribe. Although he was not afraid of trouble, he definitely did not want to become an enemy of the entire world. The Radiant Saint Hall was already pressuring him greatly. If the Sacred Weapon race was added to the mix, it would definitely be a headache. The spatial blood technique. So it really is like that. Opening the book of laws, Grey looked at the pages. After flipping through a few pages, an expression of as expected flashed through his face. The contents recorded on these pages were exactly the same as the book of laws of space he had obtained. In other words, the spatial blood technique was recorded in this book of laws. In fact, he had already expected this before he flipped through the book. The low-rank powerhouse who created this plane must have grasped the ability of the spatial law. Thus, it was not strange that the spatial blood technique was recorded in the book of rules left behind by the other party. He quickly flipped through the pages. After flipping through over 20 pages, Grey's face suddenly changed. The contents of the spatial blood technique had come to an end. What appeared before him was something he had never seen before. The temporal blood technique. It's actually the temporal blood technique. The new content was the blood technique related to the laws of time. Not only did the Book of Laws record the spatial blood technique, but it even recorded the temporal blood technique. He could not help but rejoice. Although he had already pieced together the metamorphosis secret techniques for the 5 abilities corresponding to the laws of time from various blood techniques, he could imagine that they were definitely unable to compare to the secret techniques recorded in the Book of Laws. Now that he had obtained the time rule blood technique, he could replace the previous secret technique with a better secret technique. When the time came for him to evolve the corresponding ability, the speed of his evolution would definitely be increased. This rulebook has both the space and time rule blood techniques. Could it be that the rule realm expert who created this plane had mastered the space and time rule when he was alive? Gray raised his eyebrows, feeling that this possibility was very high. As he flipped through the pages, he saw pages and pages of records related to time and blood arts. Of course, it was impossible to obtain the rule of time through direct bloodline implantation. The blood techniques recorded were all 4 elemental hybrid blood techniques that were just one step away from the rule of time. The focus was on the practice after annihilation class. Not only was there a secret skill for the 5 elements to evolve, but there was also a way to evolve from annihilation class to rule class. That made Gray's eyes look bright. The space rule book did not have a way to go from annihilation class 6 to rule class. Now he had it. He read it carefully. With his super understanding ability, he quickly understood what kind of method it was. It was a way to use a special magic potion and a secret technique to stimulate the blood power to evolve. Using this method, the blood power could evolve from Annihilation Class 6 to Annihilation Class. With this method, the blood power would evolve again. His body and soul would also evolve. When the 3 of them finished evolving, he would be able to reach Rule Class. I am afraid this is the most valuable part of this rule book. At least, it is to other people. The secret technique and special magic potion formula to evolve from Annihilation Class 6 to Rule Class was extremely valuable. It was even more valuable than the Space Rule Blood Technique and Time Rule Blood Technique. After all, this was the key to the final step. Without this secret technique, one would never be able to reach Rule Class. If this news spread, the middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow and the Annihilation Class 6 elites from the strongest families would go crazy over it. Only he had consumed the Rule Class Blood Beast blood and had a second evolution. That was why he did not need to rely on the secret technique to reach Rule Class. Even so, this secret technique was very important to him. With this secret technique, he could shorten the time he needed to reach Rule Class. As he continued to flip through, the Time Blood Technique content had ended. New content appeared. Seeing the new content, Gray squinted his eyes. The way to open a plane, after the Time Blood Technique, what was recorded was the way to open a plane that he had been looking for. As he flipped through the pages, he quickly scanned the words on each page. He understood the content of the words. The way to open a plane quickly formed in his mind. It requires time rule power to participate. The Rule Class Elite who opened this plane really does have time rule power and space rule power. According to the book, the space that was opened with the ability to open space was a static space. Time was stagnant. If one wanted to open up a space like this to become a plane, one had to add time rule power. Time rule power was used to stimulate the space and promote the evolution of the space. The sun, moon, and other celestial bodies in this space, as well as all kinds of terrain, were naturally formed during the evolution of the space. They were not transplanted later. Gray closed the book. He had finished reading the entire book of rules. His gains were huge. Not only did he obtain the transformation secret technique of time rule power, but he also obtained the transformation secret technique of the 6th level of the Annihilation class to advance to the Rule class. He also obtained the method to transform space into a plane. These were all things he urgently needed, and this book of rules had made up for them. After staying in the Sacred Weapon Race's tent for a night and returning the book of rules to the Sacred Weapon Race the next day, Gray left the group of palaces that had nothing left to find. He planned to find a place to try to transform space into a plane. However, he did not notice that when he left, an old man with white eyebrows was staring at him with a pair of cold eyes. The old man's family was one of the 2 most powerful families in the Divine Weapon territory. They had wealth and power second only to the Sacred Weapon Race. Sometimes, Even the upper echelons of the sacred weapon race would ask him for help. Due to deliberate flattery or the combination of interests, the old man with white eyebrows had a close relationship with some of the upper echelons of the sacred weapon race. After being forced to withdraw from the competition for the Book of Rules, he found the upper echelons of the sacred weapon race who were close to him. He wanted to see if he could buy the secret technique to advance to the rule class in the Book of Rules at a high price. There would always be vermin in any faction, and the sacred weapon race was no exception. The sacred weapon race's upper echelon that he had found and received a large amount of benefits. Although the upper echelon of the sacred weapon race hadn't agreed to give him a copy of the secret technique, he had revealed that Gray had a secret technique on him. I have to get the secret technique to advance to the rule class. However, the old man's eyes were filled with madness. The rule class was his lifelong dream, and it was also his hope to extend his lifespan. If he could not advance to the rule class, he would not have many years left to live. Now that he knew that Gray had the secret technique to allow him to reach the rule class, he immediately became crazy and desperate. Even though he knew that Gray had the spatial rule ability and that his identity was not simple, he could not help but have the idea of robbing and killing him. Furthermore, as long as this matter was done secretly, even the faction behind the other party would not be able to find out about them. After all, this was the divine weapon territory and not the other party's territory. He has the ability to teleport. I have to kill him in one strike. It's not safe for me to do it alone. It seems like I have to find another person. The figure of the middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow appeared in the old man's mind. The other party was like him, someone who would go crazy for this. He was definitely the most suitable partner. After leaving the palace complex and flying for more than 500 kilometers, Gray appeared beside a lake in a forest. The green grass beside the lake was fresh and refreshing. From time to time, one could see wild beasts coming to drink water. This was a harmonious scene, but this harmonious scene was quickly broken by Gray. Crack! A crack appeared in the void. It was extremely narrow and long, spreading out for more than 30 kilometers. Through the crack, one could see that there was a huge space that was more than 30 kilometers long, 20 kilometers wide, and more than 10 kilometers tall inside. This was the space that Gray had opened up. Compared to the current plane, it was still too small. However, according to the requirements of the Book of Rules, it was enough to evolve a plane. A plane was formed slowly and not overnight. As long as the evolution of the plane was triggered, one only needed to continuously expand the plane with the ability to open up space. Plane evolution. After taking out the items and the disaster-level blood fiends from the space and maintaining the crack in space, Gray's expression turned serious as he began to use the ability of time rules to evolve the plane. A large amount of purple light, which was formed by the ability of time rules, poured into the open space through the crack in space. As the purple light, which was formed by the ability of time rules, poured into the open space, the space and time, which had been frozen, began to change. Tap, tap, tap. It was as if a gear that had stopped moving had finally started to turn. Time in the space was no longer frozen, and the space began to change. In the space, as the disaster-level blood fiends and other items were taken out, an earthy yellow fog began to appear in the empty space. At first, it was extremely thin, but later, the fog became extremely dense and covered the entire space. The entire space was covered by the dense earthy yellow fog, completely blocking one's line of sight. The earthy yellow fog slowly settled down. In some places where it settled faster, various shapes were piled up. Some were like short mountains, some were like ravines, and some were like lakes without water. Then, on the surface of these short mountains, ravines, and lakes, an earthy yellow texture gradually appeared. It was soil and mountain rocks. These short mountains, ravines, and lakes were actually turning into soil and mountain rocks from the yellow fog. Chapter 747. Gray had already stopped the infusion of the time law ability, but the changes in space did not stop there. The yellow fog was still transforming into soil and mountain rocks. The time law ability was like a needle that wound a clock. When the clock was started, the clock's movement had nothing to do with it. After a few hours, All the yellow fog turned into soil and mountain rocks. What appeared in front of Gray was a complicated terrain that was 15 kilometers long. There were protruding low mountains, low-lying potholes, and long channels. The terrain was undulating, and it was no different from the natural terrain. At this moment, a large amount of water vapor had appeared in the sky at some point in time. It gathered in the sky and finally turned into dark clouds. Crack! Accompanied by thunder, a heavy rain fell in space. Under the heavy rain, lakes and rivers quickly formed in the low-lying areas and ravines. The dark clouds dispersed, leaving only white clouds in the sky. A sun evolved from a law ability appeared in the sky, blooming with dazzling light and emitting light and heat. Under the light and heat, the water accumulated on the ground began to evaporate. The moist soil dried up, and the clouds in the sky became thicker. However, the sun did not last long. A few hours later, a full moon that was not blazing appeared in the sky, and this space fell into darkness. Although it's not big, it's undoubtedly a plane. The plane has been successfully established. After closing the spatial rift, Gray let out a long sigh. He had been worried that an accident would happen, but it did not happen. The plane had been successfully established. It's actually dark outside. He looked at the full moon outside in surprise. He had been too focused on the changes in space. It was only now that he noticed that it was already night outside. The two planes actually have the same time. Gray supported his chin with his right hand. On careful thought, the plane the rule-level powerhouse had established had the same time as the origin world. Although there was a possibility that the time between the origin world and the two planes was the same, it was extremely small. He was more willing to believe that there was some inherent law that allowed different planes and worlds to have the same day and night. The plan has been successfully established. Next, Gray recalled the contents of the Book of Rules regarding the creation of a plane, and he already knew what he had to do next. What he had to do next was nothing more than expand and modify this plane. Expanding a plane was no different from when the plane was still a space. He only needed to use his ability to open up space every day to continuously expand the plane. As long as it accumulated over time, the plane would naturally become larger. To modify a plane, simply put, it was to modify the plane so that it was suitable for living things to live on. First, plants were implanted in the plane, allowing the plants to take root and grow in the plane, creating an environment suitable for animals to live in. Once the environment was suitable for animals to live in, animals would be implanted into the plane, forming a complete cycle with the plants. In the following 10 days or so, Gray completely gave up on searching for the planes that had been created by rule-level powerhouses. He completely devoted himself to expanding and modifying the planes that he had created. Compared to exploring the planes created by rule-level powerhouses, he was now more interested in expanding and modifying the planes he had created. Besides, his current gains were already extremely huge. Every day, he used half of his blood energy to expand the space and continuously transplanted plants into the space. After more than 10 days, a change occurred. The effect of expanding the space was not obvious. It only increased by a few kilometers. After all, the space was already extremely huge. However, the environment in the space had undergone a huge change. With the plant ability and earth-type ability, Gray's speed of transplanting plants was naturally extremely fast. After more than 10 days, the transplanted plants had already covered the entire plane, and the entire plane was filled with green. Not only that, but there were already butterflies and other insects in the plane. During the process of transplanting plants, it was inevitable that the pupae of these creatures would be brought in. These terracotta figurines successfully hatched in the plane and turned into butterflies and other insects. I should be able to move animals in now. Gray stuffed a wild rabbit into the plane with some anticipation and began to pay close attention to its movements. After the wild rabbit entered the plane and habitually hid in panic, it began to slowly observe the world in front of it. It poked its head out of the lush bushes and looked left and right. After making sure that there were no enemies, it walked out of the bushes. In front of it, there was a cluster of plants emitting a tempting smell of grass that attracted its attention. It walked forward and took a bite. White branches and leaves flowed out of the cut. It was fresh and juicy. It was its favorite kind of food. It then looked around vigilantly, and after confirming that there were no enemies around, it began to eat with peace of mind. When it discovered that the new environment in front of it was extremely rich in food and there were no terrifying enemies, it began to eat without restraint. After several days of eating and eating, it had obviously become fatter. Looks like the environment is completely suitable for animals to live in. After observing the wild rabbit for several days, he saw that there was no abnormality with the wild rabbit. After its body had become fatter, Gray felt that the environment of the plain was suitable for animals to live in. He began to move animals into the plain in batches. After these animals survived the initial panic, they also survived in the plain. This proved that this plain had indeed become a plain suitable for animals to live in. Let me experience it for myself. With a flash of his figure, Gray disappeared from the outside world and entered the plain he had created. He took a deep breath. The air was extremely fresh, and it was mixed with the fragrance of plants and flowers. There was no sense of chest tightness caused by lack of oxygen at all. After walking around the plain and almost going to every place, Gray left the plain in satisfaction and returned to the outside world. The transformation of the plain had undoubtedly been completely successful. The current plain was no longer fundamentally different from the plain opened up by a rule-level powerhouse. The only difference was the size of the plain. However, this could not be rushed. Even if one had the ability to open up space, the space that could be opened up every day was limited. It was impossible to be comparable to the plain opened up by a rule-level powerhouse in a short period of time. Moreover, the reason why the plain opened up by a rule-level powerhouse was so huge was because it had accumulated for hundreds or thousands of years. It's time to leave. After taking a look at the plain opened up by a rule-level powerhouse, Gray teleported and rushed to the exit. Originally, he had planned to go to the light territory and sneak back to the plain. However, because of the appearance of the rule-level powerhouse's plain, he had stayed here for nearly a month. Now it was time to leave. After nearly a month of investigation, the entire plain had been searched by almost all the factions. It was very difficult to find anything else, so all the factions left the plain one after another. When Gray left the plain, there was no one else in the entire plain other than Gray. However, at the exit of such a plain, there were two people secretly hiding in the dark. Among the two, one of them was a middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow, and the other was an old man with white eyebrows. After learning that Gray had a secret method to break through to the rule level, the middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow, who had a conflict with Gray, immediately agreed to ambush Gray. Are you sure he hasn't left the plain? After waiting for more than 10 days and still not seeing Gray, the middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow looked at the old man with white eyebrows suspiciously and asked, "My men have been guarding this place, but they didn't see him leave." The old man with white eyebrows said affirmatively, "He has the ability to teleport. Could he have teleported away without passing through the entrance?" The middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow frowned. "No, from the fact that he can't teleport through the spatial barrier. Even if he has the ability to teleport, he shouldn't be able to teleport out of the plane." The old man with white eyebrows shook his head and said solemnly, "However, we have to be careful. We only have one chance to attack. We have to kill him in one strike. Otherwise, when he reacts and teleports, it will be very difficult for us to kill him. Furthermore, we might suffer the revenge of the faction behind him." Understood. The middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow nodded solemnly. Although it was very risky, compared to the secret method to break through to the rule level, the risk was completely worth it. At his current level, his only pursuit was the supreme law realm. For this pursuit, he did not even hesitate to become enemies with the sacred weapon race. He was not afraid of having another enemy. As long as he could obtain the secret method to break through to the rule level, he only needed to find a place to cultivate. Once he broke through to the rule level, even the sacred weapon race and the faction behind them would not be able to do anything to him. He selectively ignored the fact that even if he had the secret method to break through to the rule level, Even if he had a large amount of resources, the Sacred Weapon race had only produced a few rule-level experts in the past 100,000 years. Whoosh! Several hours later, just when the two of them thought that they would not be able to wait for anyone today, a figure suddenly appeared in the void. This was a young man with black hair and an extremely youthful face. He had a different temperament from Louis Bing, but it was not inferior to Louis Bing's. This person was Gray, who was preparing to leave the plane. It's him. He's finally here. Seeing the person who appeared, the old man with white eyebrows and the middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow could not help but be excited. They brazenly attacked at the same time. Boom! The middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow turned into a beast, and beast patterns appeared on his face. His hands grew sharp claws with black light wrapped around them. He stomped on the ground, and dozens of meters around him collapsed. He relied on this momentum to shoot toward Gray. On the other side, the old man with white eyebrows did not move as much as the middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow. He stood in place and grabbed at the void with one hand. In the void, several silver-white lines appeared, carrying an extremely sharp aura as they slashed toward Gray. The law of lines was a law that could derive law lines. The silver-white law lines derived from this law had the ability to bind and cut. At the same time, these silver-white law lines were almost impossible to cut. Unless there was a special law ability that could restrain this law or a rule-level expert took action, these silver-white law lines could not be cut. Chapter 748. So, teleport and appeared near the entrance of the plane. Gray quickly headed for the entrance. Just as the old man with white eyebrows had guessed, although teleport was very powerful, it could not go through the blockage of space. There is a blockage between the plane that rule-class elites opened and the origin world. So, Gray teleported and appeared near the entrance of the plane. At this time, he suddenly felt a strong sense of danger. Before he could do anything, he saw the middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow coming at him from one side. On the other side, a few silver lines with a dangerous presence that was no weaker than the middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow were coming at him. In the blink of an eye, he was caught in a pincer attack from two directions. The sense of danger made his hair stand on end. The attacks were too fast. He did not even have time to use teleport. Using a spatial barrier to block the attacks was even more impossible. A spatial barrier could only be constructed in one direction at a time. But now, the attacks were coming from two directions. Even if he could construct a spatial barrier to block the attacks from one direction, he would still be killed by the attacks from the other direction. If he used alloy form, he would not be able to block them. After all, it was just a mixed power. How could he block an Annihilation level 6 rule power attack? It was a calculated attack. Whether it was teleport or a space barrier, it was too late. In reality, the attacks of the old man with white eyebrows and the middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow did include teleport and space barriers. When it came to space rule powers, the two of them did not know much. The old man with white eyebrows was close to the Sacred Soldier race's high class. He knew about it and gave him some advice. Blurg. The silver rule line cut into Gray's body. The left side of Gray's body started to bleed. TZZT. The sharp claws with black light grabbed Gray's right side. Wherever the black light touched Gray's body, it started to rot. It quickly spread to other parts of Gray's body. Boom. Two attacks that were Annihilation level 6. The damage they caused was scary. Under the scary power, there was a lot of damage around. The earth quaked and the mountains shook. Mountains collapsed and the earth cracked. Several terrifying scars that were more than 10 miles long appeared in the surrounding area. Some were very smooth, as if they had been cut by a sharp blade. Some were bumpy, as if they had been corroded. It was obvious that the damage was caused by the rule lines and the black light. Success. The old man with white eyebrows and the middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow were excited. Their eyes searched for Gray's corpse. However, their faces stiffened in the next moment. A black-haired figure was standing a few hundred meters away. Although he was seriously injured, he was clearly not dead. Who else could it be other than Gray? This caused them to be involuntarily shocked in their hearts. If it was anyone else, they would definitely be heavily injured under their ambush and would definitely be unable to escape death. However, this person was different. He possessed the ability to teleport. Moreover, he had already reacted and wanted to escape. They were utterly unable to stop him at all. "It's you." Heavily injured, Gray looked at the two people with an ashen face. When he saw the old man with white eyebrows, the coldness in his eyes suddenly increased sharply. He could understand why the middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow had ambushed him. After all, he had clashed with the other party in the residence of a rule-level powerhouse and snatched the tip of the golden sword. He didn't have any interaction with the old man with two eyebrows, but the old man didn't hesitate to join hands with the middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow to ambush him. This made him furious, as he was so close to dying under the attacks of the two. At the critical moment, he had used his time rule ability and space rule ability at the same time. In less than an instant, he had teleported hundreds of meters away to escape the pincer attack of the rule lines and the black light. Using teleportation under time acceleration was the same as using a spatial barrier under time acceleration. It was one of the combined uses of the time rule ability and space rule ability that he had developed in recent years. The acceleration of the time rule could increase the activation speed of teleportation by several times. It was precisely because of this increased activation speed that he had escaped the pincer attack of the two people. Attack. He's already seriously injured. Although they were very surprised that Gray had escaped their siege, their hearts sank. They knew that the possibility of killing Gray was not high, but the two of them did not give up. Instead, they attacked Gray together. Pang! The middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow was heading toward Gray. His claws had a black light. Shwa! 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 The old man with white eyebrows grabbed the air. A few silver rule lines with a scary sharp presence were heading toward Gray. He was also heading toward Gray. So, his eyes coldly looked at the two people who were attacking him. Gray teleported again. When he appeared again, he was a few thousand miles away. With his power, he was not strong enough to fight a 6-tier annihilation class being. Plus, there were two of them. Plus, he was seriously injured. Although he was very angry, he chose to run. "I have to heal him now." After teleporting, Gray's body staggered. He had lost a lot of blood. The rot was still spreading across his body. It made his injuries worse. After confirming that there was no danger around, he immediately used his reverse nurturing power. A lot of plant essence covered him. The deep wounds from the rule line's attack and the rotting wounds under the black light were all recovering. It took him more than 10 minutes to fully recover from his injuries. It was obvious how serious his injuries were this time, since it took him such a long time to recover. He teleported again. He was a few thousand miles away from where he had been. He quickly entered the dimension he had opened and disappeared from the outside world. Unless it was someone who had rule powers or a rule class elite, they would not have been able to find him in the dimension he had opened. After confirming that he was safe, Gray let out a long sigh. He was very angry. It had been a long time since he had suffered such a big loss. Are they after the gold sword tip? The first thing he thought of was that they were after the other half of the gold sword. The middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow was not happy that he had taken the other half of the gold sword tip, so he had asked the old man with white eyebrows to ambush him at the entrance of the dimension. This was the most reasonable explanation. It was also the most likely explanation. Even if it was incomplete, it was still a rule-class weapon. It was completely possible that the other party had targeted him because of it. However, I can't rule out the possibility that they are after the rulebook. Could the two of them have found out that I have the rulebook through some method and try to snatch it? Gray narrowed his eyes. He had been to the Sacred Weapon Race's camp and stayed there for a night. He must have seen a lot of people there. If some faction was curious and investigated, they might have found out that he had read the rulebook. This possibility could not be ruled out. If they are after me because of the rulebook, what role did the Sacred Weapon Race play in this? He wondered if the Sacred Weapon Race had used the two of them to get rid of him. However, he rejected this idea. The Sacred Weapon Race did not know that he had a photographic memory. They would definitely think that he had a copy of the rulebook. If he died under the attack of the two of them, the rulebook would be obtained by more people. This was obviously not what the Sacred Weapon Race wanted. Therefore, he felt that it was more likely that the two of them had found out that he had the rule book through some method. Therefore, they had the intention to kill him. The Sacred Weapon race did not know. At least, the core higher-ups of the Sacred Weapon race, Louis Bing, did not know. Although the rule book is also possible, it is more likely that they are after the gold sword tip. I haven't had the time to check it after so long. Let's check it now. When Gray took out the gold sword tip from his spatial item, the trembling sound that he had encountered before appeared in Gray's body again. The gold sword that had merged with his body trembled and wanted to drill out of his right hand. This time, he did not stop it. Instead, he allowed the gold sword to drill out of his right hand. He wanted to see what would happen after the gold sword tip and the gold sword encountered each other. Dang! After the gold sword appeared, the gold sword tip that was originally in Gray's left hand suddenly seemed to have encountered a magnet and was sucked into the gold sword. Then, the gold sword began to tremble violently, as if it was excited and did not stop vibrating. Half of the gold sword tip that was sucked into the gold sword was actually slowly melting without being burned by the high temperature. It melted into a golden liquid, and the golden liquid fused into the gold sword as soon as it appeared. The gold sword tip's melting process was very slow, but it was irreversible. After a few hours, the melting process finally ended. The gold sword tip had disappeared, leaving behind only the gold sword. A terrifying aura emanated from the gold sword, and Gray could clearly feel that the aura of the gold sword had become much stronger. At the entrance of the realm, damn it, he escaped. The middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow had an ugly expression. They had ambushed him for more than 10 days and wasted more than 10 days, but in the end, they had failed. Although they had heavily injured the other party, they had not been able to kill him. He turned his head to look at the old man with 2 eyebrows and said with a questioning voice, "Didn't you say that there was no way he would be able to escape? What is going on now?" "I'm not sure. Back then, his body had a purple light. I felt like his power was not just a space rule power anymore." The old man with 2 white eyebrows shook his head. He looked confused. According to the information he had gathered, the other party should not have been able to escape, but he had. He did not understand why. Gray had space rule power and time rule power. Only Louis Bing and the 4 6th-tier Annihilation class elites knew about that. His trading partner was a high-level member of the Holy Soldier race, but they were not as high as the 6th-tier Annihilation class. He only knew that the Holy Soldier race had given the rule book to Gray to return the favor. "What do we do now?" The middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow asked with a frown. "Guard. Keep guarding here. He cannot teleport out of the realm. He should still be in the realm. We only need to guard here and make sure he cannot leave the realm." The old man with 2 white eyebrows looked cold. "It will not be long before the realm collapses. He will have to come out even if he does not want to. Otherwise, he will die." Chapter 749. Schwa. Holding the gold sword, Gray left the dimension that he had created and went to the outside world. After getting the gold sword, he tried to use it, but it ended in failure. He did not know if it was because he did not perform the blood sacrifice to repair it, or because his level was too low. He could not activate the power of the gold sword. After coming to the origin world, the gold sword rampaged in the spirit hell once. It could consume spirits, but after that, it did not do anything mysterious. After a while, he almost forgot about the gold sword. Now that it had consumed half of the gold sword had obviously changed. He could not help but want to try using it again. Buzz. Time rule power poured in. This time, the power did not disappear like before. The moment it was poured in, the surface of the gold sword started to change. Purple light covered the body of the gold sword. The color was very dark. It covered the original color of the gold sword. The gold sword turned purple. He waved the sword. Schwa. A purple light appeared under Gray's sword. It was very thick. It was a few hundred meters thick. It quickly spread forward. Ka, ka, ka. In front of the purple light, everything that had life, be it plants or animals, was crushed. After spreading out for dozens of miles, the purple light dimmed and disappeared. In the end, a few hundred meters wide and dozens of miles long appeared in front of Gray's eyes. I am afraid it is 60 to 70 miles wide. Gray looked at the destruction that the sword had caused with shock. He could use time rule power to make plants and animals disappear, but it was far from what he was doing now. Even if he used all his power, he could only make plants and animals disappear within 6 to 7 miles. After the gold sword's buff, it reached a ridiculous 60 to 70 miles. Such power! Gray was sure that the power was more powerful than the full power attack of an Annihilation 6th level rule power. When a middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow and the old man with white eyebrows attacked him, the range was only around 10 miles. This sword's range was 60 to 70 miles. It was a few times more than that. But the consumption is very scary. Gray shook his head helplessly when he sensed that he had lost almost half of his blood force. It was obvious that such a powerful attack was achieved by consuming a huge amount of blood force. Such a method could not be used as a conventional method. Even if his blood power was at its peak, he could only swing his sword twice. Although I can only swing my sword twice, it's enough to deal with them. A cold look flashed across Gray's face. He entered the plane he had created to recover his blood power. When his blood power was restored, it would be time for revenge. Early the next morning, Gray, who had recovered his blood energy, left the backside that he had created and came to the outside world. With a teleport, he appeared more than 10 miles away from the plane's entrance and quietly lurked toward it. Teleportation could not directly enter the source world from the plane. Based on his estimation, the two of them were most likely blocking the entrance and exit of the plane, preventing him from leaving. Sure enough, when he was hiding near the entrance of the plane, he found two people at the entrance. The two of them stood more than 10 meters away from the entrance and exit of the plane, not bothering to hide their whereabouts. After the failure of the ambush was useless, so the two of them decided not to hide anymore. After some consideration, Gray walked out of his hiding place and stopped a few hundred meters away from the two of them. As Gray no longer concealed his tracks and walked out, the two of them noticed him immediately. They could not help but sneer. Blocking the entrance to the plane was indeed the right choice. It had only been a day, and the other party could not help but appear again. However, the two of them did not pounce on Gray immediately. As long as they guarded the space crack, they were not afraid that the other party would not come. "Why did you ambush me?" Seeing that the two of them did not pounce on him, Gray did not attack immediately. He looked at the two of them coldly. Although he had some guesses about the two of them, they were only guesses. If he wanted to know, the best way was to ask the two of them. "You don't seem to have a good memory? You snatched something from me, and you still ask why?" The eyes of the middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow flickered as a mocking smile appeared on his face. Although the main goal was the Book of Rules and the other half of the Golden Sword was just a side goal, he could not reveal it. If the other party knew their main goal and knew that they could not escape, the other party might destroy the Book of Rules that they copied. Then, all their previous efforts would be wasted. That's right. Hand over the other half of the Golden Sword. No, hand over everything on you, and we can spare your life. Hearing the words of the middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow, the old man with white eyebrows immediately understood the middle-aged man's plan and threatened. He knew about the other half of the Golden Sword because the deal between him and the middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow involved the other half of the Golden Sword. As for sparing Gray's life after handing over the other half of the Golden Sword, that was naturally a lie. Since they had already offended the other party, there was no reason to let him go. Not to mention the force behind the other party, just the other party's strength alone was enough to pose a great threat to his family. Therefore, there was no way he would let him go. "Are you really here for the other half of the Golden Sword?" Gray raised his eyebrows. With how precious the Golden Sword was, it was reasonable for the two to come for it. However, in his heart, he faintly felt that something was wrong. The two did not seem to be here for the other half of the Golden Sword, at least not all of it. His heart trembled slightly as he looked at the two's expressions. "You came for the Golden Sword? Are you sure you're not here for the Book of Rules?" Hearing Gray's words, the two could not help but panic. Then, they forcefully changed their expressions to shock. "The Book of Rules? What? You have the Book of Rules on you? Hand over the Book of Rules." As long as you hand over the Book of Rules, we'll spare you. The panic on the two's faces only lasted for a moment before it turned into shock. Under normal circumstances, one would not be able to notice it. However, Gray had already paid close attention to the two's expressions before he spoke. That moment of panic did not escape his eyes. You really came for the Book of Rules. Originally, he only wanted to trick the two, but he did not expect that it would actually work. The two were indeed here for the Book of Rules. There's no need to hide it. Your expressions have already betrayed you. You knew from the beginning that I had the Book of Rules. Gray sneered. I'm very curious. How did you know that I had the Book of Rules? Since you've discovered it, we won't hide it. We're indeed here for the Book of Rules. Seeing that their true purpose had been exposed by Gray, the white-browed old man withdrew the shock on his face and spoke with a mocking expression. As for how we found out, isn't it simple? Apart from the Sacred Weapon Race telling us, where else do you think we could find out? That's right. The Sacred Weapon Race was the one who told us. Their goal is to use us to kill you. Hand over the Book of Rules, and we can let you go. As for the grudge between you and the Sacred Weapon Race, we're not willing to participate. The middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow added. The Sacred Weapon Race wants to use you to kill me? Gray was shocked, but he quickly discovered the suspicious point in the other party's words. Although he had a conflict with the Sacred Weapon Race, it was only a small conflict. It did not make sense for the Sacred Weapon Race to kill him because of this. As for the Book of Rules, that made even less sense. If the other party really did not want him to have the Book of Rules, they could have refused to let him see it. They would not have sent someone to kill him after he had seen the Book of Rules. Taking a step back, even if the Sacred Weapon Race really wanted to kill him and wanted to use the two to kill him, they would not have directly told them. They would have inadvertently revealed it to the two of them. Therefore, it was very likely that the two of them were lying. After understanding this, he looked at the two of them with a slight smirk. You want to frame the Sacred Weapon Race for all this so that you can stay out of this. What a good idea. However, since you know about the Book of Rules, it seems like you have a spy in the Sacred Weapon Race. Let me guess this person's identity. To know that I have seen the Book of Rules, this person's status in the Sacred Weapon Race must not be low. If I'm not mistaken, he should be a high-ranking member of the Sacred Weapon Race. Am I right? Gray looked at the two of them with a playful expression. If it had been in the past, he naturally would not have been able to make such an accurate guess. However, after obtaining supermemory, his memory had not only improved, but also his logical and understanding abilities. After pondering for a moment, he had a guess about the whole story. Do it. Unable to mislead Gray, the middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow and the old man with both eyebrows turned gloomy. They suddenly attacked at lightning speed. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Sharp silver-white lines of law cut through the air as if they were nothing, unhindered by the air as they streaked towards Gray. The old man with white eyebrows who had launched this attack was guarding the space crack, preventing Gray from escaping through it. Boom! The middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow became a beast in a very short amount of time. He used a speed that was a few times faster than a cannonball to attack Gray. Seeing the silvery white lines of rules and the middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow, Gray coldly smiled. A gold sword appeared in his right hand. He put in time rule power and slashed with the sword. A purple light came out. Kaboom! The line of rules, which was almost indestructible for anyone under rule class, broke and disappeared under the power of time rule power. Hata! The middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow, who was rushing toward Gray, did not have time to react. The purple light swept past him. His body was stiff. He suddenly became old. His flesh disappeared. All that was left was a pile of bones with silver lines. Arg! The old man with white eyebrows who was guarding beside the spatial crack had a little time to react, but before he could do anything, his body was already enveloped by the purple light. He only had time to let out a scream, and like the middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow, he turned into a skeleton with silver threads. 2 6th-tier Annihilation elites had been killed in one hit. Chapter 750. Catcha. After killing 2 6th-level Annihilation class elites, the purple light had only weakened by half. The remaining power hit the space crack behind the old man with white eyebrows. The space crack made a crisp noise. The width of the crack, which was only a few dozen feet, suddenly expanded. It expanded to 100 feet before it stopped. Originally, the spatial rift that could only be destroyed by the combined efforts of all the forces was severely damaged by Gray's sword. Even the entire plane was affected, and the speed of the plane's collapse became faster. It is a shame that I did not find out who leaked the information to them. Shaking his head, Gray walked toward the skeletons of the two people. With the gold sword, although he had the power to kill them, he did not have the power to capture them alive. Gray walked to the skeleton of the middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow. He looked around. Gray quickly found a ring on the man's finger. It was a gray ring that looked a bit dim. It was not like this in the beginning. It must have been worn down by the time rule power, which reduced its lifespan. Gray took off the ring. A trace of blood power pierced into the ring. A space that was about 100,000 square feet appeared in front of him. There were many items in the space. There were mountains of magic coins. There were many different types of magic potions that were as high as level 5. There were dozens of them. There were a few inheritance-class magic weapons. There were also many precious magic medicine. Clearly, the middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow had gained a lot in the plane. Gray put the ring into his space item. He walked toward the skeleton of the old man with white eyebrows. He looked around the skeleton. On his left wrist, he found a quaint bracelet. A trace of blood power went in. It was also a space of 100,000 square feet. There were many precious items. What surprised him the most was that there were a dozen bottles of level 5 longevity potions. One bottle of longevity potion like that could extend one's life by 1 or 200 years. Gray put the bracelet into his space item. He stepped out of the space crack and left the plane. He returned to the origin world. The strongest family, the McKinnon family? With a cold smile, Gray teleported in a direction. It was in the direction of the old man with white eyebrows, the McKinnon family. From the old man's space item, Gray received a detailed map of the God Weapon territory. It included the location of the strongest McKinnon family. He was never a troublemaker, but he was not someone who was willing to suffer losses. He had almost died at the hands of the old man with white eyebrows and the middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow. Although he had killed 2 people, he could not let them go. The middle-aged man with the scar on his left eyebrow did not have a clan, but the old man with white eyebrows did. Naturally, it was impossible for him not to make a trip. Moreover, there might be people in this clan who knew who the spy in the Sacred Weapon race was. He would never let go of the Sacred Weapon tribe's upper echelon, who had nearly killed him, even if the other party was from the Sacred Weapon tribe. Several days later, a secret letter was delivered to a high-ranking member of the Sacred Weapon race. The high-ranking member who received the letter had an excited expression. He quietly left the Sacred Weapon race and rushed to a valley several thousand li away from the Sacred Weapon race. "Who are you? Where's Moss?" The moment he arrived at the valley, the expression of the McKinnon family changed. His old friend was not in the valley. Instead, there was a young man standing with his back to him. He felt a sense of danger. "I'll have to disappoint you. He can't come." Gray turned around and sneered at the person in front of him. It was an old man who did not look young. He was even older than the old man with white eyebrows. His face was wrinkled like the bark of an old tree. His hair was white and somewhat withered. It was as if he had reached the end of his life. This person was the spy of the old man with white eyebrows. He was very old. If there were no accidents, he would have at most 10 or 20 years of life left. The reason he had told the old man with white eyebrows about Gray was that the old man had promised to give him a bottle of precious grade 5 longevity medicine. It was enough to extend his life by 1 or 200 years. When he received the old man's letter, he thought the old man had succeeded in fulfilling his promise. So, he immediately rushed over. "It's you." Seeing Gray's face, the old man's expression changed drastically. He turned around and fled. It was obvious that the old man with white eyebrows had failed in his ambush. Moreover, the other party had traced him back to him. "You still want to leave now?" Gray sneered and teleported in front of Old Man Marka. He quickly set up a spatial barrier around Old Man Marka. The old man, Marka, knew Gray's methods. His fire ability suddenly shot out like fireworks in all directions. Some of it hit the spatial barrier, while some of it splashed far away. There was clearly no spatial barrier in that direction. Whoosh! He flew in a direction without a spatial barrier, but midway, he suddenly changed direction and flew in another direction without a spatial barrier. Bang! However, what shocked him was that after he ran for a few dozen meters, he suddenly crashed into an invisible barrier and was blocked. He quickly flew in another direction, but without exception, he was also blocked by an invisible barrier. Why are you in such a hurry to leave? Don't you want a life-extending medicine? His body was covered with purple light. Gray had a cold smile on his face. He slowly walked toward the old man. If a 6th-tier Annihilation class elite had used the method he had just used, he would have been able to escape the space cage. It was a shame he was not a 6th-tier Annihilation class elite. He could not escape the time rule power that accelerated the space barrier cage. I'm a member of the Holy Soldier race. Let me go. Otherwise, the Holy Soldier race will not forgive you. Cold sweat rolled down his forehead. The old man tried to act tough. Do not worry. I will not do anything to you, Han-san said with a smile. Not only that, but I will also give you the life-extending medicine you deserve, Gray said with a smile. As he walked forward, the volume of the space barrier rapidly shrank. When he arrived in front of old Marka, the space barrier had shrunk to the size of a coffin. Old Marka couldn't move at all. You cannot kill me. I am a member of the Holy Soldier race. Gray Fergus, you will die a horrible death. In the old man's shocked gaze, Gray raised the gold sword in his hand. He was going to stab the old man's heart, who was unable to move. Mr. Gray. After 10 minutes, the old man's chest wound had been healed. He stood up and greeted Gray with respect. There was a clear hole in his clothes at his chest. Yeah, Gray nodded. Give me a copy of the rulebook that the Holy Soldier race has. Then, look in the Holy Soldier race's collection. See if there is any disaster class blood beast blood with corpse control and ghost power. The reason he had revived the old man was to prevent the Holy Soldier race from investigating his death. The other reason was that he wanted to use the Holy Soldier race's collection to find disaster class blood beast blood with corpse control and ghost power. Now that he had reached Annihilation class, it was time to level up those two powers. A day later, Gray, who had consumed the blood and obtained disaster class corpse control and ghost power, continued on his journey. As he expected, a Saint class faction like the Holy Soldier race had a rich collection of blood. It was indeed the blood of disaster class blood beasts with corpse control and ghost power. Unfortunately, the Holy Soldier race even had a few types of rule blood beast blood in their collection. However, with the old man's identity, he did not have the right to use those blood. There were more than 10 bottles of level 5 longevity medicine. The old man with white eyebrows must have found them in the rule class elite's residence. Gray gave one of the bottles to the old man. He did not want to spy in the Holy Soldier race to only live for 10 or 20 years. As for the rest of the medicine, he was going to leave it for the Fergus family. 3 months later, I have finally arrived at the light territory. However, the map is not detailed enough. It does not mark the fiery rock desert. The map Gray had prepared before he came was a huge map that spanned dozens of ridges. The map covered a huge area, but it was not very accurate. The map of the light territory was not very detailed. It looks like I have to go into the city and buy a detailed map of the light territory. It has been so many years. The light temple should not be paying attention to me anymore. After searching around, Gray found a city. He landed at a place far away from the city, and like the other people entering and exiting the city, he lined up to enter the city. Have you heard? 3 months ago, Her Highness the Saintess fought the Darkness Temple's holy son and defeated him in the end. What? The Saintess defeated the Darkness Temple's son? She is too strong. The Saintess is too strong. Even the Darkness Temple's son was defeated by her. That's right. Her Highness the Holy Maiden is also one of the most talented people among the Holy Sons and Holy Maidens. I heard that Lord Saint thinks highly of her potential and asserts that she has a high chance of becoming a rule-level expert. After buying a detailed map of the light territory from a grocery store, Gray entered a tavern. He had not had a proper meal for a long time. In the tavern, business was quite good. More than half of the tables were already occupied. Among them, there were a total of 4 people at one table, 2 men and 2 women. They were all young people, and their clothes were not of low quality. They were obviously the children of some influential families. The 4 of them chatted excitedly. They kept mentioning the Saintess. If there were groupies in this world, the 4 of them would be groupies without a doubt. The Saintess? Gray smiled as he took a sip of ale. He could not help but think of the woman with platinum hair and a perfect figure. Back then, the reason why he could defeat her was because her cultivation was suppressed by the plane. She was unable to unleash her full battle prowess. In terms of true battle prowess, he was definitely inferior to her. Now that 5 years had passed, her strength would definitely increase greatly with her talent and the resources of the Light Temple. However, his strength would also increase greatly after 5 years. If they encountered each other, the outcome would only be known after the battle. Chapter 751. After finishing his meal, Gray took out a map. Quickly, he found where he was and where the Red Rock Desert was. He paid the bill, left the bar, and went outside the city. After confirming the direction, he flew toward the Red Rock Desert. He did not use Annihilation Class speed. He only used the speed of Magic Light Class 1. Now that he had entered the light territory, if he still used Annihilation Class speed, it would be too obvious. After all, there were very few Annihilation Class people his age. It would be easy to attract attention and expose his whereabouts. So, he traveled for a few hours. Suddenly, there was a whistling sound behind him. He looked back and saw the 2 men and 2 women he had seen in the bar. The 4 young people were chasing after him. The 4 of them were very fast. They had all reached the 4th level of Magic Light. For the 4 of them to reach that level at such a young age meant that they were very talented. If there were no surprises, the 4 of them should have come from a very powerful family. Facing the 4 of them, Gray did not do anything. He continued to move forward. After the 4 of them caught up with him, they did not stop. They kept flying forward. Clearly, the 4 of them were not chasing after him. It is the person from the bar. They were a few hundred meters away from Gray. One of the 4 of them, a young woman with shoulder-length hair, recognized Gray. His power has just reached Magic Light Class. Not bad. He should be from a big family. A handsome young man commented with a sense of superiority. Strength and speed were the best indicators of a person's level. Their battle power could be increased or decreased based on the strength of their blood beast abilities, but strength and speed were rarely affected. The man's speed was at the 1st level of Magic Light. That meant his level was around the 1st level of Magic Light. Compared to them, who were at least at the 4th level of Magic Light, the man was a few levels lower. That was why he felt so superior. This person looks familiar to me. The other woman among the 4 of them had her hair tied into a braid. She had a scarf wrapped around her braid. She looked a bit confused. Familiar? How is that possible? We have never seen him before. Don't tell me you are attracted to him because he is too handsome. The short-haired young woman was bold enough to tease. She did not care about the 2 men beside her. The 2 men beside her smiled bitterly. They had been traveling together, so they were not surprised. D*MNU. Say that again. The woman with the braid suddenly blushed. She stared at the short-haired young woman. Although this young man was the type that she liked, she wasn't infatuated to that degree. Also, if she wanted to find someone in the future, they had to be stronger than her. This young man, with his 1st level of Demon Shine, simply wasn't qualified. Following the short-haired woman's interruption, the long-haired woman no longer paid attention to Gray, thinking that she had seen wrongly. Too slow. In the evening, Gray said to himself in a wooden hut in the plain he had opened. He had just finished his dinner. He controlled his speed to be at the 1st level of Magic Light so as not to attract attention. It was true that he did not attract attention. He met several groups of people in a day. These people only glanced at him and then moved away. Obviously, he could not attract their attention at the 1st level of Magic Light. However, although it was not easy to attract attention, it greatly slowed down his speed. He estimated that with his current distance from the Flaming Rock Desert, it would take at least a month to reach it. Take a runic ship? Gray thought of taking a runic ship, but he immediately rejected it. There were too many people on a runic ship. It would be easy to be discovered by the Radiant Temple. Looks like I can only travel slowly. The safest way was to travel slowly. Although it was much slower, it was undoubtedly safer. In the Radiant Temple's sphere of influence, stability was the most important. He set off early the next morning. After more than 20 days, he had already traveled more than half of his journey. There were no disturbances along the way. Obviously, his low-key way of traveling was useful. Although it was slow, it was indeed very inconspicuous. In addition, he did not enter the city again apart from when he bought the map, so he did not attract any attention. At the same time, the 2 men and 2 women that Gray had met before finally returned to their clan. After returning to the clan, the young woman with braided hair could not help but think of Gray again. That faint sense of familiarity caused her to think of him from time to time. She felt that his face was very familiar, but she just could not recall it. She frowned and walked into the study of the master of the clan, who was her father. She casually flipped through the bookshelves. As she flipped through, a piece of paper fell out. She reached out and caught it. Looking at the paper, she was stunned in the next moment. There was a portrait of a person on the paper. The person in the portrait was basically the same as the person she would think of from time to time recently. Below the portrait was the symbol of the Radiant Saint Hall. This was a person that the Radiant Saint Hall was currently searching for. In a hall within the Radiant Saint Hall, a young woman in tight robes finished her cultivation and emerged from her cultivation room. The young woman had dazzling, platinum-colored hair. She possessed a slender figure and a beautiful, flawless face. Her skin was as white as snow, and it seemed to be fragile. Her bearing was gentle yet heroic. Her every movement was filled with beauty. She was a perfect woman, so perfect that she could not be picked out at all. She was the holy maiden of the Radiant Saint Hall, Aurora. She was one of the most talented people in the history of the Radiant Saint Hall. Even the Radiant Saint thought highly of her talent, believing that she had a chance at breaking through to the realm of laws. In the battle 3 months ago, she had defeated the chosen saint of the Darkness Saint Hall, pushing her reputation to the peak. Are you still unwilling to appear? Aurora accepted a towel from a female servant and wiped away the sweat on her forehead. She looked at the sky, and a figure appeared in her head. The outside world would always describe her as undefeated among her peers, but only she and a few members of the upper echelon of the Radiant Saint Hall knew that she had once been defeated. Over 5 years ago, she had descended on a realm and encountered a young man who had grasped the laws of time. She had used everything she had in that battle, but she was not his opponent in the end. She could only flee in defeat. That was the humiliation of her life. In order to wash away the humiliation, she cultivated madly, and her strength skyrocketed. Even the chosen saint of the Darkness, Saint Hall, had been defeated by her. However, that was not the opponent she wanted to defeat. The person she truly wanted to defeat was the person who had defeated her 5 years ago. Unfortunately, even with the intelligence of the Radiant Saint Hall, they were unable to find any information about that person in the 5 years that had passed. Even the spies they sent to the Space-Time Temple were unable to find any information about him. He seemed to have evaporated, never appearing again. She turned to look at a corner of the corridor. After a long while, a middle-aged woman walked over from the corner of the corridor. The middle-aged woman saw her and walked up to greet her respectfully. "Your Highness." "What is it?" "Your Highness, the person you're looking for has appeared." "Where is he?" Aurora's eyes suddenly shone with resplendent light. Battle intent rose from her body. 5 years. After 5 whole years, there was finally news about that person. Battle intent had already begun to burn in her heart. Someone discovered him at the border of the Radiant Territory. They're still searching for his location. Sensing the terrifying aura from Aurora, the middle-aged woman was shocked. She knew that the Saintess had become stronger again. She hurriedly replied in awe. "Do you have a rough estimate of his location?" The Saintess asked. "Yes. When he was discovered, he was heading west." The middle-aged woman replied. "Heading west. Could it be?" A sharp light flashed through the Saintess' eyes. Chapter 752. The fiery rock desert was a desert that stretched for thousands of miles. It was hot all year round, and not a single blade of grass grew there. It was known as a forbidden zone for life. It was rumored that tens of thousands of years ago, there was a vast ocean there. Because of a great battle, the ocean disappeared and turned into scorched earth. It became a forbidden zone for life. I am finally here. Standing outside the flaming rock desert, Gray looked at the flaming rock desert that was emitting a strange heat, and not even a blade of grass grew. His face lit up with joy. After traveling at the speed of a tortoise for a month, he had finally arrived here. He could clearly feel the connection between himself and the people who had been resurrected by the resurrection power. With this connection, he could find the entrance to the plane even with his eyes closed. The only thing he had to worry about was how strong the people from the Light Temple who were guarding the entrance to the plane were. Last time, the people from the Light Temple who were guarding the entrance to the plane were all killed by him. The Light Temple must have sent a stronger force to protect it. Of course, his current power was not what it used to be. Compared to 5 years ago, he was many times stronger. As long as it was not a 6th-tier Annihilation Elite, he was confident he could defeat and kill them. When the time came, he could use the resurrection power to resurrect these people. He could hide it from the Light Temple and take control of the plane. Whoosh! He walked close to the ground. He used his mind connection to go deeper into the fiery rock desert. After a day, he was thousands of miles deep into the fiery rock desert. He finally approached the entrance to the plane. In the distance, he could see a tall building. It was built with the unique stone of the desert. It was very majestic and spectacular. In the battle back then, the building was damaged. Now, it had been repaired. Gray looked to the side of the building. There was a black barrier that was a few hundred feet in diameter. It stood there very strangely. That was the entrance to the plane. Gray's eyes flashed with anticipation. He then looked to the side of the building. He was going to hide in that building. Suddenly, he felt a strong sense of danger. Then he saw a golden light that looked like lightning and fire shoot out from the place that was originally empty. It quickly shot toward him. Oh no, I have been discovered. His face changed. He stomped hard on the ground. As the dirt and rocks flew, his body jumped back to where he had been. Poof! The golden beam of light that looked like both lightning and fire pierced through like a peerless sword, leaving behind a bottomless hole that was filled with traces of melting. Where are they hiding? Using the force of the leap, Gray retreated more than 100 meters. His eyes vigilantly looked at the empty place where there was no one. There was a huge rock there. It was no different from the other rocks in the fiery rock desert, except that it was huge. Buzz, the mountain rocks swayed slightly like water ripples. Then 3 young people walked out from the mountain rocks. 2 men and 1 woman. All of them had cold and arrogant expressions on their faces. A haughty aura was emitted from their bodies. After waiting in this damned place for so long, I finally arrived. The woman among the 3 wrinkled her nose and wiped the sweat on her forehead, full of resentment. The fiery rock desert was a very special place. It was hot all year round, and the temperature was extremely high. The most troublesome thing was that this kind of heat could not be eliminated by any temperature control runic array. Even if one took a few baths every day, they would still feel uncomfortable. For someone like her who loved cleanliness and beauty, this was simply unimaginable torture. Therefore, she was extremely resentful towards Gray, who was the culprit behind all this. Gibbert, why did you suddenly attack? Our mission is to block their retreat. His opponent is Her Highness the Saintess. Among the 3, a tall and good-looking young man frowned and looked at the young man next to him with dissatisfaction. Her Highness the Saintess is so strong that even the Darkness Temple's holy son is no match for her. Is he worthy of fighting Her Highness the Saintess? The last of the 3, a young man with a high nose, looked at Gray with contempt. He is not worthy of being Her Highness the Saintess' opponent. Let me kill him for Her Highness the Saintess. As soon as he finished speaking, a beam of light that resembled both lightning and flame shot towards Gray with a terrifying momentum. At the same time, he also pounced towards Gray. He was one of the most outstanding disciples of the Radiant Saint Hall aside from the Saintess. He admired the Saintess, who was like a perfect goddess. Now was the time to show off his excellence to the Saintess. If he could defeat the opponent that the Saintess saw as her opponent, he would definitely be able to gain her favor. As a result, when he saw Gray, he immediately gave up on his previous plans and attacked Gray brazenly. Since this person can gain Her Highness the Saintess' attention, he probably isn't weak. Let me help you. Seeing the young man with a high nose charge towards Gray, a gleam of light flashed through the eyes of the tall young man. He also drew his sword and charged over. A terrifying whirlwind mixed with fire, metal, and lightning shot towards Gray like a terrifying spinning blade. The young man with a high nose admired the Saintess, but so did he. In reality, there were plenty of people who admired the Saintess among the younger generation of the Radiant Saint Hall. However, most of them knew their limits, so they had given up on the thought of winning her heart long ago. Only the most outstanding disciples below the Saintess continued to fight over her. What's going on? Has the Radiant Saint Hall already discovered my whereabouts? Gray's heart sank when he saw the 3 people who had appeared. He studied the surroundings cautiously. The 3 of them clearly knew that he would come here, so they hid here to ambush him. The Radiant Saint Hall should have discovered him already. Although he had been extremely careful, he had never thought that the Radiant Saint Hall would still discover him. Swish! Woo! The strangely shaped golden streak of light and the strange whirlwind shot over together. They produced a terrifying pressure of wind as they attacked him. Coldness flashed through his eyes when he saw the 2 incoming attacks. Whether the Radiant Saint Hall had discovered him or whether there were people hiding in the darkness aside, he would kill the 2 of them first. Whoosh! With a wave of his right hand, the dark green mist condensed and expanded outwards in an arc. Just the invisible pressure of wind that it produced was enough to shatter the huge rocks in the surroundings. Boom! The strangely shaped golden light beam and the strangely shaped tornado were easily shattered by the dark green fog arc. The dark green fog arc attacked the young man with the high nose bridge and the tall young man with the tall figure. What? So powerful? The expressions of the 2 young men changed. One of them erected a golden barrier of light in front of him, while the other erected a barrier of wind in front of him. However, the golden barrier of light and the barrier of wind were easily shattered by the arc of dark green mist. The arc of dark green mist struck the 2 of them. Spurt! Spurt! As if they had been struck by a huge wave, the 2 of them were blown away with hideous, corrosive wounds all over their bodies. They spat out blood, and it was unknown whether they were dead or alive when they landed. How was this possible? The young woman among the 3 of them was hesitating about whether she should attack Gray together, but she had never thought that in the next moment the fate of her 2 companions would be unknown. Cold sweat appeared on her forehead, and she could not help but retreat rapidly. Their opponent's strength was not something the 3 of them could deal with. Could it be? Gray ignored the young woman who was retreating rapidly. Instead, he looked behind the woman sternly. A golden streak of light shot over from behind the woman. It was so fast that it was no slower than him using time acceleration. Within the golden streak of light was the figure of a graceful woman. Combined with the words of the 2 young men from before, he already had an idea of the woman's identity. Swish! The golden streak of light stopped several hundred meters away from him. The golden streak of light dispersed, and a young woman with long, platinum hair appeared. The woman wore a white battlesuit. Both her figure and face were perfect. Every part of her body was curvaceous. It was hard to believe that such a perfect woman really existed. The Radiant Saint, Gray's expression was solemn as he read out the other party's identity. As expected, it was the other party. 5 years had passed since that battle, and he had encountered the other party again. Chapter 753. You have finally appeared. Her platinum hair fluttered in the wind. A white, long sword hung from the left side of her waist. The holy maiden Aurora stared at Gray with a burning gaze. A powerful battle intent radiated from her. Her white battle attire revealed her curvaceous figure. It also made her seem extraordinarily heroic. She was like a goddess of war. Long time no see, holy maiden. Gray stared at Aurora. None of the holy sons or holy maidens were simple people. Although he had been trying to catch up in the past 5 years, the huge gap was not something he could catch up to in 5 years. Her cultivation level should have surpassed his. What he was more worried about was how many people the Holy Palace had sent this time. Was there a 6th-tier annihilation elite among them? My name is Aurora. The battle intent in the Holy Maiden's eyes was almost overflowing. Shwa! The long sword was unsheathed, revealing the platinum blade. Almost at the same time, a beam of platinum light with a destructive presence surged towards Gray like a destructive light. Gray Fergus! Gray's expression became even more solemn. Just the power of this platinum light alone was 2 levels stronger than the previous 2. The opponent's strength was clear to see. Shwa! He pushed his time rule power to the limit. A purple light shot out, clashing with the platinum light. There was no great commotion. There was only an eerie silence. Wherever it passed, the boiling air whirlpool and the rocks that had been affected by the platinum light were all silenced by an invisible power. Pop! The 2 extreme powers collided, creating a terrifying shockwave. Under the shockwave, the ground rolled like a wave. So, Aurora was covered in platinum light. She charged out of the shockwave. The platinum longsword in her hand became dozens of meters long. It was wholly like the sword of God. It slashed down towards Gray's head. Pop! Gray held his sword horizontally to block. The purple sword and the huge sword collided, and a terrifying shockwave spread out from the point of collision. A huge crater appeared on the ground. After blocking this sword attack, Gray's body flashed and appeared on Aurora's left side, swinging his sword towards Aurora's waist without any mercy. Under the power of the rules of time, everything in the surroundings became silent. There was no sound of the sword being swung out, as if it was a soundless sword. Pop! Although Gray's speed was extremely fast under the acceleration of the time rule ability, it wasn't so fast that Aurora couldn't react in time. She held the platinum longsword with her slender white hands and blocked the sword. Pop, pop, pop! The 2 of them quickly exchanged blows. Their weapons clashed one after another, and destructive shockwaves spread out continuously. The battle went from the ground to the sky, and then from the sky to the ground. One was covered in platinum light, while the other was covered in purple light. Their faces couldn't be seen clearly. One could only vaguely see a man and a woman in the light, as if 2 gods were fighting. At their current level, compared to ordinary people, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to call them gods. With a lifespan of over 1,000 years and terrifying battle power that could destroy mountains and rivers, compared to ordinary people with an average lifespan of less than 50 years, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to call them gods. In fact, most of the legends about gods in history were passed down after witnessing the battles of absolute powerhouses like them. Cough, cough. He can actually fight against the Saintess? Looking at the battle between Gray and Aurora, the heavily injured young man and the tall young man breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. After taking the advanced healing potion, their lives were saved. However, although they were still alive, they were still shocked mentally. They were actually unable to block even a single attack from their opponent. This caused them, who were publicly acknowledged as outstanding disciples and took pride in their achievements, to suffer a great blow. They even felt dejected in their hearts. Now that they saw their opponent block the attack of the Saintess, while they were shocked, they also felt comforted. Their opponent could even fight against the Saintess, so it was natural that they couldn't beat him. Could that be the power of time rule? The young woman who was with the 2 of them was shocked as her pupils contracted. The Time and Space Temple was a Saint-class faction that was close to the Light Temple. As a disciple of the Light Temple, she naturally knew about the time rule power and space rule power that the Time and Space Temple were best at. The purple light that Gray used, whether it was the color or the power that could silence everything, was very similar to the time rule power. That's right, that is the time rule power. A middle-aged man with blonde hair looked at the battle in the distance and nodded. He was the vice leader of the Light Temple, a 6th-tier annihilation elite. He was the one who had saved the 2 heavily injured young people. Otherwise, the 2 of them would have died from the shockwaves of the battle between Gray and Aurora. After discovering Gray, the Light Temple naturally took action. Although the Saintess Aurora had asked for her to deal with Gray, and the Light Temple acknowledged her power, they still sent him, who was very strong even among the 6th-tier Annihilation elites, to hold the fort. If Aurora could defeat and kill her opponent, that would be the best. If she couldn't, then it would be his turn. Huh! There was another collision. The terrifying shockwave caused the ground to roll like a wave. The Saintess Aurora retreated to distance herself from Gray. Light sword. Her expression became serious. She held the sword with both hands and placed it before her. Buzz! A large amount of white and gold light condensed above his head. It turned into a huge white and gold sword that was dozens of feet long. The white and gold sword shone with holy light. It was holy and beautiful. Under the holy and beautiful light, there was a presence that could destroy the sky and the earth. The godly power was like a prison. It was like the punishment of a god. Boom! The huge holy sword that was dozens of feet long slashed toward Gray. It stirred up turbulence. It was like the light that could split the sky and the earth. It attacked Gray. Dangerous. Extremely dangerous. Seeing the huge sword coming, Gray's hair stood on end. He felt a strong sense of danger. The power of that sword had completely exceeded the power of the Time Rule power. It was not something that the Time Rule power could block. It was not that the Time Rule power was weaker than the Light Rule power. It was because his opponent's level was higher than his. So, the acceleration of the Time Rule was pushed to the limit. He was like a flash of purple light. He dodged to the side. Catcha! He had only just dodged when the white and gold sword slashed down. It hit the desert that was filled with all kinds of rocks. There was a loud noise. A long canyon appeared. It was more than a few hundred feet deep. It kept going forward. It was around 10 miles before it stopped. The full power of a 6th-tier Annihilation class elite's attack could reach more than 10 miles. That sword's power had reached almost 10 miles. That meant that the sword was not far from the 6th-tier Annihilation class. Very strong power. Even though he had already dodged, he was still affected by the aftershocks. His body was knocked askew by the turbulent airflow. Gray forcibly stabilized his body and looked at the damage caused by the sword with a solemn expression. The next moment, he once again turned into a purple light and flashed out. Boom! Another platinum-colored giant sword was formed and slashed towards him, almost brushing past his shoulder. His clothes were torn and tattered by the strong wind created by the platinum-colored giant sword, looking like the clothes of a beggar. The Holy Virgin is going to win. Seeing Gray in such a bad state, the young man with a high nose looked happy. Even if he has Time Rule power, so what? He is still no match for the Holy Virgin. The tall young man also had a joyful look on his face. Aurora does have a big advantage. The blond middle-aged man stroked his blond beard. He was full of praise. Aurora's level is higher than his. Even if he has Time Rule power, his power is still weaker than Aurora's. Boom, boom, boom. Under the attack of the white and gold giant sword, Gray kept dodging. He was at a disadvantage. If this continued, he would be hit by the white and gold giant sword sooner or later. With the power of the white and gold giant sword, if Gray was hit by it, even if he had alloy defense, he would be severely injured. He might even die on the spot. Under such a crisis, Gray's eyes did not show any panic. He looked at the middle-aged man in the distance with fear. He then locked his gaze on Aurora. So, he used teleport under time, acceleration. His body suddenly appeared behind Aurora. The long sword wrapped in purple light carried a silent power as it stabbed toward Aurora's back. Although he did not see the blond middle-aged man attack, his instincts told him that the blond middle-aged man was very powerful. He might be an Annihilation Grade 6 elite. He had Aurora, who was about as powerful as him, and the blond middle-aged man, who was even more powerful. Therefore, he did not use Space Rule right away. Instead, he used Space Rule as a surprise attack. He wanted to heavily injure or even kill Aurora in one go so that the blond middle-aged man would not have time to save her. Be careful! Seeing Gray suddenly appear behind Aurora, the young man with the high nose, the tall young man, and the other young woman from the Light St. Hall all changed their expressions. They were shocked and shouted at Aurora to warn her. Teleport. The blond middle-aged man's praise turned into shock and worry. Teleport. That was definitely space rule power teleport. He had never thought that not only did his opponent have time rule power, but he also had space rule power. This shocked him greatly. However, although he was shocked, he did not hesitate. Boom! He was covered in white and gold light. He turned into a golden beam of light and shot toward the two of them. Chapter 754. Teleport. This is teleport. Aurora's flawless face was filled with shock. Although she did not turn around to look, she could guess that the person who suddenly appeared behind her was Gray Fergus. To suddenly disappear and then suddenly appear behind her, such an ability had to be a teleport ability derived from space rule power. Aside from time rule power, her opponent also had space rule power. He had both time rule power and space rule power. What kind of monster was she facing? She was extremely shocked and horrified, but now was not the time to be shocked and horrified. Buzz. The sense of danger was like a knife on her back. She did not doubt that in the next moment, a sharp blade would stab her vital parts. So, her entire body was covered in platinum light. Her light rule power was pushed to the max. Her entire body was almost one with the light. She turned into a beam of gold light and quickly dodged to the side. Light rule power controlled light rule power. Although the principle was different from time rule power, it could still increase the user's speed tremendously. However, this sword was a sword that Gray had been preparing for a long time. It was extremely unexpected, and it came from behind where she could not see. Naturally, it was not easy to dodge. Puff! Although she had avoided being hit in the heart, her left shoulder was still pierced. As Aurora's blood spilled out, under the effect of time rule power, her appearance quickly changed. In an extremely short amount of time, she went from a young woman to a middle-aged woman around 40 years old. The once majestic battle goddess turned into a middle-aged woman with clear wrinkles on her face. She fell from the sky with heavy injuries. When one's level reached Annihilation class, the power of time rule power was even stronger. Even for an Annihilation class elite with high resistance, one hit was enough to take away 1,000 years of life. Fortunately, the opponent was not that old. If it had been someone else, an older Annihilation class elite, one hit would have been enough to kill them. Schwa! Without hesitation, Gray swung his sword again. A purple stripe with a silent power swept toward Aurora like the light of a death god. If she was hit by this purple light, Aurora would definitely die. In her current state, she could not withstand another time deprivation. Boom! However, just as the purple radiance was about to hit Aurora, a platinum radiance appeared and clashed with the purple radiance. The purple radiance dissipated while the platinum radiance continued forward, splitting the clouds and the sky in half. You deserve to die. A white gold light flashed to Aurora's side, and she was caught by the middle-aged man. Seeing Aurora's miserable state, the middle-aged man stared at Gray furiously. His murderous intent, which was enough to make a disaster-class blood beast tremble, flooded toward Gray. He was filled with killing intent because of Aurora's injuries, and even more so because of the strength and potential Gray had displayed. He was a person who had grasped 2 laws before he had even become an expert of laws, yet he stood against the Radiant Saint Hall. If he was not killed and allowed to develop, he would definitely become a great problem for the Radiant Saint Hall in the future. Seeing that Aurora was saved by the golden-haired middle-aged man, the golden-haired middle-aged man's face was filled with killing intent. Gray's face also flashed with killing intent. He switched the sword to his left hand, and another sword appeared in his right hand. It was the gold sword. Time rule power poured into it. The gold sword was dyed purple. It radiated with a terrifying aura as it slashed toward the middle-aged man and Aurora. Schwa! A purple light that covered a few hundred meters shot toward the two. It was like a river rushing down. It was not very powerful, but it was eerily silent. Wherever it passed, the rocks were silently crushed. All sound disappeared. It was terrifyingly silent. It was so silent that it made people's hearts tremble. It was as if boundless darkness had enveloped the two of them at an extremely fast speed. Although he did not kill Aurora, he did let Aurora meet up with the middle-aged man. This gave him a chance to use the gold sword. The gold sword was extremely powerful. Even a 6th-tier Annihilation class being could not block it. However, it also consumed a lot of energy. Even in his best state, he could only slash twice. Even if he was in his best state, he would not do that easily. After 2 slashes, he would lose all of his power. He would not even be able to teleport away. Now, the middle-aged man and Aurora, who were a threat to him, had met up. This gave him a chance. He did not need 2 slashes. 1 slash was enough to kill the 2 of them. Sun's sword. Seeing the gold sword in Gray's hand, the middle-aged man was shocked. As an upper-class member of the Light Temple, he knew where the sword came from. This was the sword of the past Sun Saints of the Sun Temple that had once been destroyed. It was a weapon of laws. After the Radiant Saint Hall obtained it, they sent it to Gray's realm, preparing to use the entire realm as nourishment to repair the sword. However, before the blood sacrifice, the Time and Space Temple stopped them. They were unable to complete the repair. They did not expect the sword to end up in the hands of someone else. Schwa. They could not escape in time. The middle-aged man and Aurora were drowned in the purple light. The time rule power was activated by the Sun Sword. Its power was far beyond the 6th tier of Annihilation class. If it locked down, even a 6th tier Annihilation class elite would not be able to escape. Ka-ka. Soundlessly, all of the mountain rocks were crushed. An extremely wide and terrifying trail extended forward. It extended for dozens of miles before it finally stopped. Everything on this trail had decayed and shattered under the erosion of time. The original Gobi had turned into a desert, and smoke and dust filled the sky. Phew! After confirming that the 2 of them were unable to escape from the purple light, Gray let out a breath of relief. With the power of the time rule that had been buffed by the gold sword, if the 2 of them were unable to escape before the purple light landed, they would have died. He knew that very well. A few months ago, 2 6th-tier Annihilation class elites had been killed by his slash. He believed the 2 of them would not be an exception. The only shame was that they had died under the time rule power. The 2 of them would have been left with skeletons. He could not revive them and control them. He had wasted 2 powerful fighters. What? The dust dispersed. Gray looked over. His face changed. He saw a ball-shaped, white-gold light screen where the middle-aged man and Aurora were. The platinum-colored screen of light was not dazzling. Instead of looking like light, it looked more like some kind of substance. There were many cracks on its surface, and they were densely packed together. It was impossible to count them all. It looked as if it would shatter with a single touch, but it had been preserved by his sword strike just now. A bad premonition appeared in his heart. Sure enough, in the next moment, his bad premonition was confirmed. Catcha! The white-gold light screen collapsed. Inside it, the middle-aged man and Aurora appeared. In front of them, there was a small, white-gold sword that was a few centimeters long. Fine cracks covered the surface of the platinum-colored sword, just like the platinum-colored light screen from before. Catcha! The body was full of cracks. The small, white-gold sword was unable to survive. There was a crisp sound. It turned into countless tiny pieces and scattered. A forbidden weapon. A forbidden weapon made by a rule-class elite. A thought flashed through Gray's head as he said sternly. It had shattered after just a single use, but could block his attack with the power of the laws of time amplified by the golden sword. It could only be a forbidden weapon that a rule-class elite had paid a price to create. He had underestimated the Radiant Saint Hall far too much. The middle-aged man with a scar on his left eyebrow and the white-eyebrowed old man could not block the strike from the golden sword because they did not have any heritage. Their clans had never produced a rule-class expert. However, the Radiant Saint Hall was clearly different. Although they did not have 2 rule-class experts in the same era, they had never stopped producing rule-class experts. An organization like that would naturally have a rule-class forbidden weapon. Both the middle-aged man and Aurora possessed extremely great statuses in the Radiant Saint Hall, so they would naturally possess something like that. The Sun's sword has actually been repaired? No, that plane hasn't been sacrificed. Is the broken half of the sword in the hands of the space-time Saint Hall? The platinum light enveloped Aurora, and her wounds and body rapidly recovered. The middle-aged man stared at the golden sword in Gray's hand in surprise and joy. The sword that the radiant St. Hall had spent tens of thousands of years to repair had been taken away by the space-time St. Hall. Originally, he had let out a sigh of relief because the space-time St. Hall's hypocrisy did not carry out the final blood sacrifice. He felt that even if the Sun Sword ended up in their hands, it would only be a peak legacy weapon at most. However, he had never thought that the space-time St. Hall would possess the broken half of the sword. The space-time St. Hall had obtained a complete weapon of laws. You can't swing it a second time, can you? Hand over the Sun Sword, and I'll spare your life. The middle-aged man's eyes burned with desire. The Sun Sword had already been repaired. If he could obtain the Sun Sword and wield it, he would possess battle prowess comparable to a Rule-class expert. No one below the Rule class would be his opponent. He would even be able to put up a fight against a Rule-class expert. Boom! Boom! Two beams of platinum light, one thick and one thin, shot out with a destructive aura. The blonde middle-aged man and Aurora, who had recovered, attacked Gray at the same time, bringing up a terrifying wave of energy. They were like two sky-reaching pillars, crashing towards Gray. Swish! Under the acceleration of the laws of time, Gray teleported away. When he reappeared, he was already at the entrance of the plane. Without activating the Sun Sword, even the middle-aged man alone was enough to make things difficult for him, let alone the recovered Aurora. Faced with the two of them, he had no intention of fighting at all. Stop him. Don't let him enter the plane. The middle-aged man called out. He turned into a streak of golden light and shot over. Boom, boom, boom. There was no need for him to give the order. The dozen or so people guarding the planar barrier had already attacked Gray in unison. They were the people who had truly been sent to guard the barrier. They had guessed Gray's intentions and had been guarding against Gray from the very beginning.